Number 26 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format because we have a lot of people joining us online. I just want to reiterate what the process and the procedures for a hybrid format. I would like to remind participants of the following points. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. En ce qui concerne l'interprétation,
for those who are on Zoom, when it comes to interpretation, you have a choice at the bottom of your screen. You will be able to select the channel for interpretation, floor English or French. Those in the room can use the earpiece and the right channel.
Zoom, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. The committee clerks and I will do the best we can to maintain consolidated speaking order. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. So pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, December 10th, 2025, and the motion adopted on Wednesday, December 10th, 2025, the committee shall resume consideration of Bill C-15, an act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on November 4th, 2025. I would like to now take a moment to welcome and introduce our witnesses that are joining us today. We have Carol Wilding, the Chief Executive Officer from the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. On a Hubert Rioux, le directeur économique.
Hubert Rioux, Economic Director, and Mathieu Lavigne, Vice President of Public and Economic Affairs at the Federation of Quebec Chambers of Commerce.
Executive Director from Fintechs Canada, as well as Jessica Oliver, the Head of Government and Regulatory Relations from Wealthsimple. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and we will begin with Ms. Wilding, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, honourable members of the committee, for inviting me to speak today. As President and CEO of the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, I'm here to bring the perspectives of more than 105,000 CPAs in Ontario, which is almost half of all CPAs in the country, to this important discussion on Budget 2025 Bill C-15 and the future of the Canadian economy. At Davos, Prime Minister Carney laid out the stakes. Canada's economy is facing a rupture, not a transition. We recognize what is happening, and we're determined to act accordingly. Given the foundational role that CPAs play in Canada's capital markets and the economy, the profession is ready and willing to step up and help drive the economic growth that Canada needs now more than ever. As tax practitioners and advisors, CPAs understand the important role that tax policy plays in empowering growth or constraining it, which is why we were pleased to see Bill C-15 propose some important measures to address long-standing issues with Canada's tax system. For instance, CPA Ontario has advocated for the restoration of the accelerated investment incentive through the productivity super deduction. This reinstatement will help to boost investment, allow faster depreciation of capital assets. It will enable firms to recover capital costs more quickly, enhance cash flow, and encourage reinvestment into Canadian businesses and Canadian workers. But capital is always looking for stability. In times of upheaval, certainty would be a competitive advantage for Canada, which is why the accelerated investment incentive and other provisions in the productivity super deduction would be even more impactful if they were made permanent. Investment is key to Canada's future, but that investment needs to go to the sectors where it will yield the greatest benefit. Our natural resources are still essential for building Canada's future, but we all know that the global economy has changed. Intangible assets, such as intellectual property, artificial intelligence, and data, now play a critical role in economic prosperity and national sovereignty. Our tax system must evolve to reflect this reality. The simplification and expansion of the SR&ED tax credit in Bill C-15 was a welcome change and one that Canada's innovators and entrepreneurs have long advocated for. But this is not a moment that can be met with incrementalism. Canada must be bold, ambitious, and willing to act. We must recognize that after decades of a piecemeal approach to tax policy, we have a system that is unwieldy and complex, and that complexity is a barrier to investment and growth. As tax specialists, CPAs can see the consequences firsthand as capital is diverted away from where it can be put to the best use. Bill C-15 makes some efforts to address this, including through the proposed elimination of some inefficient tax expenditures. But we are still a long way off from a necessary and, frankly, overdue broad review of Canada's tax system. A robust expert review that could be used as a blueprint for a tax system that drives growth, competitiveness, and productivity for Canada. Reforming our tax system will help Canada attract the investment, entrepreneurship, and talent that will grow our economy, create jobs, and raise the standard of living for all Canadians. Echoing Prime Minister Carney, nostalgia is not a strategy. To quote, "Now is the time to execute fairly and fast." Thank you, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Wilding. On va continuer maintenant avec la...
We'll continue with the Quebec Federation of Chambers of Commerce. 5 minutes. Good morning, and thank you to the Standing Committee on Finance of the House of Commons for inviting us to speak on C-15, the Budget Implementation Act. The FCCQ encompasses over 1,000 businesses, 120 chambers of commerce. We represent over 40,000 businesses in Quebec. We were in Ottawa to present the budget. We also present pre-budget remarks to show the consensus of businesses on policy. For the bill we're looking at today, this budget is a transformative budget. It is focused on investment and defense. I reiterate how important it is for Canada to establish an industrial defense strategy because Quebec is in a very good position to receive a significant part of defense investment. We would wish to see the enhancement and incentives of research and development. It is finally in place. That's good news. We need to continue supporting private investment in innovation. The super deduction for productivity is also a good measure in the same vein. Eliminating the luxury tax on aircraft is something that was very well received by the Quebec aerospace industry. It's also a foundation to build strong communities, $51 billion over 10 years to fund local infrastructure. We hope to see these projects deployed quickly. Quebec regions need to have their fair share of the fund. We are extremely supportive of increasing capital gains, the capital gains exemption to $1.25 million. We expect over 50,000 business transfers by 2030. So it's very important to have measures like these. However, we're disappointed to see that the Canadian Entrepreneur Incentive in the 2024-25 budget was cancelled. That would have reduced the capital gains inclusion. We are also very glad to see the Paperwork Reduction Act amendments that allow ministers to grant temporary regulatory exemptions. This is logical and should be made systematic as long as it's transparent and has well-defined criteria. What we would like to see and do not see in C-15 or the budget are the following points. General corporate taxation, there's no relief planned. The U.S.'s One Big Beautiful Bill Act is a turning point for our tax competitiveness and our ability to attract investment. We requested an increase in the small business deduction that would have helped all SMEs across Canada. In R&D and innovation, there's still insufficient tax incentives to commercialize patented innovations. We have a deduction of that kind in Quebec, the deduction for commercialization of innovations. Accelerated investment incentives should be permanent rather than phased out after 2030. The U.S. has done that in its bill. And we can't talk to federal members of parliament without talking about temporary foreign workers. We are asking for a complete moratorium. People are abandoning projects and investments because they cannot find workers. Regarding public procurement, reciprocal procurement and Buy Canada policies should apply to strategic tenders that were already underway before they were implemented, like Via Rail. In exports, the goal is ambitious to double exports outside the U.S. by 2035, but the support measures announced are not sufficient to achieve this. Part of the revenue generated from the sale of products and services in new markets should be tax exempt. There should be a tax credit applied to marketing expenses incurred in developing new markets. Financial assistance for businesses and sectors affected by U.S. tariffs have overly restrictive criteria. Funds are difficult to access. In the telecom sector, hundreds of companies are at risk. Several CRTC decisions could have the effect of inhibiting regional investment. So that more or less covers what we discussed in our brief, and we'll have an opportunity to elaborate in answering questions.
With Ms. Vega from Fintechs Canada for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. My name is Adriana Vega, and I'm Executive Director of Fintechs Canada. Fintechs Canada is the leading voice for Canada's financial technology sector. Collectively, our more than 50 members serve millions of Canadians across the country every day. Thank you for the invitation to appear today to discuss Bill C-15. If passed and implemented, the financial sector reforms included in this budget bill will help make life more affordable for Canadians and our economy more productive. As we know, our financial sector is highly concentrated, and over time, this has had real impacts on Canadians' ability to hold agency over their money. It has also limited access to capital for both individuals and, critically, for our small businesses. Canada has not kept up with the rest of the world in boosting competition in our financial sector, limiting Canadians' access to broader choice and bespoke and affordable offerings. The reforms included in Bill C-15, concretely those introducing Canada's open banking regime, are hugely welcome and long overdue. When enforced, the Consumer-Driven Banking Act will make the financial sector work better and harder for Canadians. By way of example, research by the Competition Bureau estimates that in the insurance sector alone, a data portability framework could save Canadians between $1 and $3.8 billion annually. Also in the BIA is the Stablecoin Act. This is an ambitious piece of legislation that responds to industry calls for a federal framework, and one that we believe will support Canada's sovereignty in the future of finance. However, the road ahead is still long. Regulation still needs to be developed, and we now need to focus on striking the right balance that provides clarity, certainty, and safety, and that preserves the pro-competition spirit of the law. Canada has a unique opportunity to leverage consumer-driven banking and transformative technologies like stablecoins to provide a long overdue boost to our economy, and delaying is not an option. Thank you for the invitation, and I look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Ms. Vega. And I will now turn to Ms. Oliver for 5 minutes from Wealthsimple.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Et
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee members, for inviting me to testify this morning. It is a pleasure to be with you.
Wealthsimple is now one of Canada's most trusted financial institutions. We serve more than 3 million clients from coast to coast to coast, holding over $100 billion in assets on their behalf. We've pioneered products that have driven down the cost of financial services, from commission-free stock and ETF trading to no-fee interest-bearing checking accounts. In 2025, we saved our clients an estimated $1.3 billion in fees and paid out more than $200 million in interest in everyday checking accounts. The Budget Implementation Act your committee is considering enacts key legislative changes we regard as critical to building a more competitive, dynamic, and consumer-centered financial sector, including the completion of the open banking framework, which, when combined with the launch of real-time payment settlement, will make managing money faster, safer, and cheaper for Canadians, and the creation of legislation regulating stablecoins, which will enable Canadian companies to bring Canadian dollar stablecoins to market, offer settlement efficiencies, and bolster our monetary sovereignty. We're pleased to see Parliament thoroughly considering the legislation and hope to see the process conclude promptly. The most immediately impactful change for Canadian consumers of financial products in Budget 2025, though, is the government's promise to introduce measures this spring to prohibit exit fees on investment and registered accounts. These fees have skyrocketed in the past decade. In February 2016, a CBC Consumer Report found that the last of the big banks had introduced an exit fee on TFSAs, moving from $0 to $75. Less than a decade later, transfer fees are a near ubiquitous $150 per account. At the same time, the number of accounts Canadians hold has increased dramatically thanks to the wonderful popularity of the TFSA and the FHSA. While Canadians have some of the lowest rates of checking account switching, competition among investment platforms is healthy, and this is a good thing. It means consumers are engaged and making decisions, and we continue to see record inbound and outbound transfers because consumers are shopping around. But last year, clients transferring accounts to Wealthsimple were charged more than $60 million in exit fees. In January 2026, $10 million. These flat fees fall hardest on younger Canadians and those with smaller balances, the very people these accounts are designed to protect. Regular Canadians. A 25-year-old man from Calgary transferred 4 accounts, a TFSA, RRSP, FHSA, and a non-registered account from a major bank. All 4 transfers were processed electronically in under a week. The administrative cost to the bank was a few dollars. He was charged $600. These fees bear no relationship with the actual cost of processing a transfer. Meanwhile, a 71-year-old retired bank executive in Northern Ontario transferred her savings, a TFSA, RRSP, and a LIRA. $2 million in investments were liquidated and cash was withdrawn from her account. The funds didn't arrive at Wealthsimple for 26 business days, costing her more than $10,000 in foregone interest, exposing her to market volatility, and she paid $459 in fees. These are not isolated examples. When inbound transfers peaked last March 2025, our clients had $3 billion in transit from other institutions. Putting aside the discussion on execution costs, delays benefit the sending institution at the client's expense. During a manual transfer, the client's capital is removed from their account and placed on the sending institution's balance sheet, available to be deployed for profit as loans or to meet liquidity requirements without any corresponding benefit to the client. It's not acceptable. The federal government regulates registered accounts through the Income Tax Act.
Ms. Oliver, can I ask you to wrap up, please?
Yes,
Thank
sure. We recognize there is some jurisdictional complexity, but the absence of a panacea within the purview of a single government
Thank you, Ms.
regulator.
Oliver. I'm going to have to cut it off there.
Okay, great.
We've
Thank
concluded
you.
the time. Okay, we're going to begin our first round of questioning. On va commencer avec Monsieur Lefebvre pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
We'll begin with Mr. Lefebvre, 6 minutes. Inaudible, without a microphone. I'd like to take advantage of the fact that the FCCQ is here today, and I'll address my questions to them. I have the recommendations you made there in front of me, and one of those, which is very current, is about the temporary foreign workers program. This weekend, I put some questions to the Minister of Finance asking whether he would support a grandfather clause, and he never actually answered. How would you envisage a grandfather clause for Quebec entrepreneurs? Thank you for the question, Mr. Lefebvre. Yes, we were in Ottawa last week with business leaders, specifically about the temporary foreign workers program. Here's how things stand at present, since permits aren't being renewed by the federal government because of the restrictions imposed a little over a year ago. Businesses, in practical terms, are having to cancel contracts and suspend investment projects because they're short of workers. These are difficult decisions being made in many sectors. We're asking the federal government at least to grandfather temporary foreign workers who are here, have jobs, and are integrated. They have to be allowed to remain here because otherwise our economy would be in even more difficulty than it is already in Montreal, the hospitality sector, in other cities and other sectors. We're seeing the same problem. The only short-term solution is to keep these people in their jobs. Do you have any commitment from the government? Did you get a commitment once you explained everything? We can see that the problem is in the region. The unemployment rate is below 5.5%. So it's more critical in the regions. Did you get any commitment from the government? On this, no. The issue for us is that the federal government and the Quebec government are sending the ball into each other's courts, as it were. We're asking both of them to agree or implement measures that they themselves can control. The federal government controls the temporary foreign workers program, so they can take action. And since we're talking about financial issues at present, well, businesses were consulted, and those who are affected are losing on average 500 million and anticipate losing another 2 million on average over the next few years. So, of course, the bigger the company, the greater the financial impact. Clearly, this is a humanitarian issue, but it's also very much an economic issue. If companies are using the temporary foreign workers program, that means they can't find people where they are. It is a last resort for them. So we need to prevent workers under the program who are here from leaving. It's going to have an impact on Quebec workers in a company because, for example, if there's a shortage of electricians or welders, it's having the company in trouble is also going to affect the jobs of managers. I'll give you an example. You were talking about welders and temporary workers who've been here for a few years. They're doing great work. And these are jobs in small towns when a spouse may work at the local convenience store or in a local restaurant. And that's the kind of thing that keeps our small towns alive. And the children are part of society as well. I'm a former business person myself. I was in manufacturing. I worked in roofing products. So it's very difficult for these companies to see what to do next. Back to Ideal Cargo that I was talking about. 6 employees would lose their jobs soon if their permits of their foreign workers aren't renewed. And they've got a full order book. Last week, we had a representative with us from CF Metal, and it's the same thing. If they can no longer count on temporary foreign workers for a specific portion of their business's value chain, it'll affect the rest of the business. For example, workers are here for the Philippines. The program is important because those workers are not yet in a position to apply for permanent residency because they haven't attained the level of skill in French required by the Quebec government. So it's not possible for them to apply for residency as we're being told they can. Thank you. I'd like to talk about balancing the budget. You said it was important to come back to a balanced budget. I talked to the Minister of Finance about that as well, and he said that we were now in a different world and there was no actual deadline or calendar for coming back to a balanced budget. Brief answer, please. I'm going to answer. I'm the economic director. We want a balanced budget act in Ottawa, like the one in Quebec, so that budgetary policy is predictable over time. We know that Canada is in a relatively good position when it comes to the percentage of debt to GDP, the debt to GDP ratio, but the public debt is still very high. I'm afraid I have to stop this. Thank you, Mr. Lefebvre. Mr. Bidart, 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome everyone. And thank you all for being here. I have only 6 minutes, but I think I might get to a second round if we all do what we need to do. I don't know where to begin, but I'll begin with the FCCQ. Thank you for being here today, gentlemen. I do have quite a number of comments, but the goal isn't really for me to speak. It's to hear you. So, generally speaking, Mr. Lavigne, how would you describe the views of your members on the federal budget, generally speaking, in broad terms? Thank you for the question. On the whole, they take a positive view because it focuses on increasing private sector investment and defense investment. That was a priority that we had set out in our pre-budget brief. And on the whole, yes, positive view of the budget. Thank you for being brief. As for defense, well, yesterday we were to announce our defense industrial strategy, but given the events, that has been postponed. But the strategy is ready and will be announced soon, and it constitutes an important component of what we'll be doing moving forward. It'll be important for Quebec as well. Private sector investment is at the core of the budget. We want to accelerate investment. So with that in view, and I'll come back to temporary foreign workers at the end, with that in view, you briefly alluded to transfers by companies, and in Quebec and other places there will be a significant number of such transfers, and this is something that the Federation has been asking for some time. What, in your view, would be the most effective measure that the federal government could put in place to facilitate these business transfers? Thank you. Hubert Yu, Economic Director of the FCCQ. 50,000 business transfers are expected by 2030 in Quebec, so we're disappointed to see that there are insufficient incentives because the opportunity costs will be significant in spite of the increased cumulative capital gains exemption, because those who have to pay capital gains of over 1.25 million will be more numerous than expected. In Quebec, we have the 50% plus 1 Act, which obliges family business transfers to immediately transfer from the first year 50% of voting actions so that they can access the capital gains exemption. So what we've been asking for is to allow the progressive transfer of voting shares to alleviate the burden on family businesses, which are extremely important to Quebec's economy. Thank you. We'll talk about that a bit later. You suggested something that intrigued me. In our effort to double exports outside the U.S., you talked about tax incentives so that businesses could increase their non-U.S. export activities. Could you tell us more? Elaborate on that, please. Yes, it's an interesting question. The government's goal, as you know, is to double non-U.S. exports by 2035. There's a significant diversification objectives. And across the world and in the U.S., there are tax incentive models that encourage just that. For example, in the U.S., there's the foreign-derived intangible income tax, which makes it possible to de-tax part of the revenue from exports to new markets. So we believe that it would be a good idea to do something similar in Canada. Another way of going about it would be to provide grant tax credits covering part of the marketing and business development spending by new businesses, by small SMEs in international markets, So there are two potential ways that would achieve that goal. Thank you. I've taken note of that because it does look very interesting. You know, there's a budget every year, so there'll be a budget this year. And now, temporary foreign workers. Yes, I understand the issues very well. They are complex indeed. There are two governments involved, but we are working on temporary solutions, and all I can say is that there will be announcements soon. Thank you, Mr. Leitao. Mr. Garon, 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning to our colleagues and the witnesses who are here today. My question is to the FCCQ. You said the federal government's role was important in infrastructure transfers. You take a positive view of the Strong Communities Fund. The Minister of Finance had announced $50 billion in infrastructure of development. The Strong Communities Fund is $51 billion over 10 years, so that's $5 billion across Canada per year, and $500 million for Quebec for hospital infrastructure. That doesn't even cover the Maisonneuve-Rosemont Hospital. What do you think about the federal government's role in infrastructure transfer? And yes, is what's being done sufficient? Sufficient? It'll never be really sufficient because the infrastructure needs in Quebec are tremendous. A little over a year ago, we did a study on maintaining assets. So what's lacking is not investment in new infrastructure that's coming, but it's investment on maintaining existing infrastructure. I use the Montreal Metro every day. There are an increasing number of issues. The Saint-Michel station had to close recently. We are seeing the impact of the current state of infrastructure, the impact it has on everything. So before setting out to invest in new projects, we should make sure that what we have works as it should. There is a tax capacity or budgetary capacity in Ottawa, and yet infrastructure is largely municipal and provincial. That shows how federalism doesn't function as it should. As an economist, I know that, for example, that Great Britain reviewed their budgetary systems and their tax systems periodically. Other countries do this, and this is something that should be done in all sectors. The government is choosing players and sectors and taking a position. Some sectors are left aside, like telecommunications, when we need to strengthen our fiber optic sovereignty. And we know that this will, in many cases, disadvantage smaller SMEs. If you have any changes you could make on fast tracking of amortization, what would you do? Yes, I think that incentive needs to be extended to other sectors, particularly mining and defense, given the very significant investment that's going to be needed in the coming years. We need to catch up on private sector investment and productivity, and that will require ongoing and increasing investment. Mr. Rio, do you think it's the government's strategy to make things temporary, to tell companies, take the advantage of this while it's there? Perhaps there's also the issue of budgetary capacity, I imagine, but predictability is very important for businesses. The point isn't to say, invest now and then stop doing anything. You have to invest year after year to catch up as we need to. Mr. Rio, you talked about the regulatory weight. The government does provide some freedom. The main restrictions that are needed, what restrictions would be needed to make sure that the will of Parliament is carried out? Well, what we need are objective criteria that have to be, I believe, more clearly defined than they are in C15. C15 is quite broad, talks about risk management, and public interest, but that doesn't really mean much in detail. So you think it should be more precise? Yes. France experimentation is a good example. It has very precise criteria and it works well. You can see what the criteria are on their website. Thank you. We could look at that and use it in our amendments. Ms. Wilding, in the budget, the Minister of Finance has separated operating expenses and investment expenditure. And we're a bit unsure about things that the Minister of Finance is calling investment. In your view, is everything that the minister calls investment actually investment in the accounting sense of the word?
Thank you for the question. I'm actually really here to talk more about the tax policy than the actual accounting treatment of the federal budget. I think that's something that, down the road as the budget becomes implemented and obviously the...
OK, non, je comprends. On va gagner du temps.
I understand, and I understand you're not comfortable with the question. I'll move quickly to the FCCQ.
I just don't think I'm here to opine on the accounting treatment versus the underlying tax policy.
Non, mais on est là pour parler du budget. Puis
Well, we are here to talk about the budget, and it seems to me accountants are well placed to tell us what an investment is. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Garon, we will now continue with Mr. Kelly for 5 minutes, please.
No, I think
I thought you said you were switching.
in the second hour.
Oh, in the second hour.
Mr. McLean.
Okay, well then we're going with Mr. McLean. Thank you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam. My questions of Ms. Vega and Ms. Oliver today, if I may. First of all, open banking has been far delayed in Canada for a long time. I remember working on it in 2017 and 18, and somehow it's been stalled ever since then. And that is not a good thing. Do you know why it stalled as long as it did in Canada? I'll ask Ms. Oliver.
I think in terms of support, there's only been growing support over the last number of years.
So I'm not, sorry to interrupt, but I'm not asking about support. I'm asking what took the government so long to get between 2018 and 2016 to any kind of open banking framework when every other country in the world was moving much more quickly.
I couldn't say.
Okay, thank you. Australia has real-time rails already, has had real-time rails since open banking was introduced over 8 years ago. Do you think real-time rail will be relevant once crypto trading and Bitcoin and stablecoin issuance will replace it? And is it going to be more expensive than the alternative at some point?
We absolutely see the RTR as critical and complementary to other innovations. Stable coins we think are also very important, but digital assets are in their infancy. Every other G7 country has a real-time rail. All those countries had government leading that and mandating participation to ensure that consumers would benefit and that competition would increase. And we absolutely see a role for the RTR in Canada to do the same.
Okay, what are the costs of a real-time rail versus a stablecoin transaction?
Well, I'm not sure. I know that the vast majority, well over 95% of stablecoin transactions are in USD.
Okay, but we're talking about a legislation here that's going to move and get set up in Canada, and it leads to my next question, the importance of having this infrastructure in Canada so we abide by Canadian law. Do you think that's adequately laid out in the government's framework here about how they're going to establish a crypto stablecoin regime in Canada?
Well, I think the step to assert jurisdiction over stablecoins as a payment instrument is certainly in line with how our consumers use it. So if you were to look at Bitcoin, which we offer our clients and are regulated as a security, in a given month, 10% of the total volume that we hold. So let's just say if you had $1 million in Bitcoin, 100,000 would transact in a given month. USDC is the most common stablecoin transacted on our platform, and it moves on and off at 250%. So we see that it is being used to settle transactions, not to buy and hold. And so we are supportive of federal jurisdiction over stablecoins, and we hope that provinces.
Thank you. If I can
Sure.
move on here, just quickly, please. The last question to you is the one about the Bank of Canada as the regulator here. And do you see a problem if there's other issuers of stablecoins, if the Bank of Canada, which is also a potential issuer of a stablecoin here, is the regulator of those entities?
I think so. We are comfortable with the Bank of Canada as a regulator of payments.
Do you think that there's an issue with privacy if the Bank of Canada, the Government of Canada, is the regulator of the stable coins? And I'm thinking about issues like we had in Canada here where the government froze bank accounts. The ability to freeze, the Bank of Canada to be able to freeze stablecoin issuances is a gross overstep, as the federal court has said. Do you think that this leads to that risk?
No, I don't see a correlation.
Okay, and I'll go to Ms. Vega now for a quick follow-up question. The issue with this act is that there is no interest payable on the stablecoins, and yet most of your issuers give bonuses and interest in order to move over. Do you see this being a problem as far as getting a stablecoin established with your members?
Sure. Well, I think that devil's in the details. Even in the U.S. in the Genius Act, just because the way that it was drafted, they also prohibit yield payment. So I think that is still early days. What matters to our members, as you rightly mentioned, is that if you're a wallet, if you're providing the service, the competitive advantage or disadvantage that a yield or a rewards scheme, if you like, will allow is what's going to determine whether or not we remain competitive as a country in the stablecoin framework. So I think that a lot of the details are still left to be seen in the regulation, but in the conversations that I've had with the folks at Department of Finance, it is well understood the dynamic and sort of the impact that this could have on competition.
Thank you, Ms. Vega. We're going to have to end this round there. Thank you, Mr. McLean. We'll continue now for 5 minutes with Mr. Sawatsky.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses for coming today. Ms. Vega, I just wonder if I could maybe start with a general question. If you could just summarize what from Budget 2025 do you think will be most beneficial for Canadians?
Quite frankly, I think that big picture, this spirit of competition in some of these reforms for the financial sector is something that I mentioned in my remarks is long overdue, and it's something that you can see the impact across the economy more broadly from a consumer perspective, but also from a small business perspective. Open banking, I think everybody in this room and some of the members have already mentioned it themselves. A lot of us have been waiting for this for a long time. And I think that it's time to move to implementation, execution, and making sure that it works in the way that it's meant to work in a pro-competition spirit. Once we have that, you will see impacts in the reduction of friction to financial transactions. You will see an impact in participants having to show up and offer better offerings, and different participants being able to offer more beneficial loans and services to their consumers. And I would say specifically specifically, I would point to small businesses, because right now transacting as a small business is very, very complicated. I am convinced personally that it prevents small businesses from entering global trade. You know, if you're a small business and you're facing a payment that's going to be delayed for several weeks, you think twice before you even enter those transactions. So I think that both Open Banking and Stablecoin Act, from our perspective, are the ones that are going to be most impactful.
Thank you very much. So I guess you would say that it's on the right track, this budget. Is that correct?
Certainly, and I would encourage the members to approve it. I think from our perspective, it's a robust package of reforms for the financial sector. And if there's any gaps to be addressed, we are very committed to working with the government on regulatory developments. So I'm happy to talk more about that.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful to hear. I certainly hope it passes soon as well. Over to you, Ms. Oliver. In Wealthsimple's pre-budget consultations, there was a note here that exit fees have risen from $0 to $75 in the early 2010s, near ubiquitous $150 per account in 2025, costing Canadians hundreds of millions of dollars annually and borne disproportionately by Gen Z and millennials. So I was just wondering if you could speak broadly on the exit fees.
Sure. Yeah, the disproportionate impact on young people, which I think is very important, because we talk a lot about reductions in trust and confidence in government and in large institutions. And I think it's important to think about what contributes to that. And if you have $5,000 in a first-time home savings account, and you are moving, or you're getting married, or for whatever reason you've decided you would like to move that account, when you are being levied a $150 fee on a $5,000 balance, that it feels defeating. It feels like large institutions are able to take advantage of you and get you coming and going with impunity. And they feel that way because that is what they are living. That is what they are experiencing. And the people who are able to have these fees reversed or reimbursed are wealthy clients. The vast majority, we try to reimburse. We used to reimburse fees that other institutions charged. We do not charge exit fees. We used to reimburse fees for clients with accounts above $5,000. It was not sustainable. We increased it to $15,000. It was not sustainable. We increased it to $25,000, but we made it automatic instead of having people have to request it. And we realized that only 35% of clients that were eligible for reimbursement were asking. We looked into who had not been asking, or the reverse. The wealthier you were, the older you were, the more likely you were to ask for the reimbursement that you were entitled to. And forget that half the clients transferring to Wealthsimple were not above the $25,000 threshold. According to CRA, the average TFSA does not reach $25,000 until the age of 50, which means the average client under 50 moving a TFSA is not eligible for reimbursement. And even if they are unlikely to know to ask.
Thank you, especially at a time where a lot of young people are having issues with affordability. I think there would be some welcome change there. So Wealthsimple's pre-budget consultation also called for completing consumer-driven banking.
Apologies, Mr. Sawatsky, that completes your time. Thank you very much. On va continuer avec Monsieur Garon pour 2 minutes et demie.
Mr. Garon, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll continue with the FCCQ. I wanted to talk about the digital services tax. We applauded the tax, even though it might have been imperfect. The Liberal government decided to repeal it to please Donald Trump, but nothing pleases Donald Trump, so it led to nothing. What do you think about the repeal of the digital services tax? And more generally, what do you think about what's happening with our media, all media that are supposed to be the spine, the cornerstone of our democracy? Could we have used revenue from the digital services tax to establish a fund dedicated to support local media? What's your general view? Yes, I think eliminating the tax is a mixed opportunity because it would have helped our telecommunications industry, which would then not, because that industry wouldn't have had to pay it. As my colleague said, many local and regional media in Quebec have shut down over the past 20 years. And we believe that to compensate the elimination of the DST, measures can be put in place. For example, extend the scope of the reimbursable tax credit for the cost of journalistic work that would cover written and broadcast media, spend more on government advertising in Canadian media, and amend Section 19 of the Income Tax Act to prevent the tax deduction for advertising in Canada by foreign platforms. Sorry, it's not much time when you're the second opposition party. Do you see untaxed platforms that are getting a free ride and making money with material produced by local media? Aren't you frustrated by that? Well, I'll put it this way, Mr. Garon. The competitive playing field needs to be level for everyone. I'd like to add something. Current legislation and the CRTC dates from a time where the big players were Canadian. Now the big players are international corporation, and even our largest Canadian and Quebec businesses are not the major players they were in the past, not in today's landscape. Thank you, Mr. Garon.
Bobina for 5 minutes, please.
And I will be directing my questions to Ms. Wilding. Thank you for sharing your time. I used to be an adjudicator in the mid-market space, in the commercial space, and so naturally accountants were my best friends for many years. So thank you for sharing your expertise with us. Just generally speaking, where do you see the biggest compliance cost for SMEs?
Well, I think from a small medium market perspective, actually one of the biggest hurdles is the corporate tax, right, which is a disincentive to growth. And small businesses hit that threshold of 500,000 pretty quickly. So we're actually disincenting small businesses to grow at a time when, critically we need to be seeding them. That truly is the largest impediment from a small business perspective in terms of their ability to grow. Once you hit that threshold, you are significantly increasing your tax, as well as it's just disincenting them to invest. And we see that in the conversations that we have with our practitioners who are tax advisors to the small medium market space, which is obviously a very big component of Canada's economy.
Exactly. And I always say it's the small businesses that become medium businesses that become large businesses. So of
exactly.
course, we want to make sure that we are supporting the small businesses. So and on that light, are there any federal tax rules that disproportionately hurt startups or that small business, that family business perhaps, from your perspective?
Well, I'd go back to some of the comments I made at the beginning, which is, we really are moving into, we're already there, although our tax system has not kept up, into an innovation and intangibles, a digital economy. Yet we're trying to operate in a modern economy with a tax system that is 60 years old. So the tax system doesn't really reflect or understand things like the movement of IP. Take, for example, a patent box regime, which was in the fall economic statement. So curious that it didn't find its way into this, hopeful that it will, because those are some of the examples of bold tax reform that we need. We need broad-based tax reform, both at the corporate and the personal level, if we are going to incent small businesses and entrepreneurs, particularly in the innovation economy, to step in, to invest, and more importantly, to stay in Canada, because things like IP and intangible assets, they move very easily across borders.
Yeah, you're right. And so I recall from my times in lending that cash flow was a big piece beyond any other metric. And oftentimes cash flow in uncertain times is the most critical, the most important aspect of the business for a small business. And right now, you could say we are in those uncertain times economically. What legislative changes would you recommend that would we consider to improve the stability of that cash flow, particularly for SMEs?
Yes, cash flow is a critical, right? If you're trying to make your payroll and quite literally some of the small businesses are in terms of their ability to go payroll to payroll. I think some of the things that, are in there in terms of the write-offs, the ability to have some of those accelerated write-offs does help. In the short term. But the bigger piece is the uncertainty of some of these that are going to potentially encourage investment and therefore help cash flow, but are not actually permanent, right? So they will hold back from additional capital investment, which will inhibit in terms of cash flow just follows in terms of where the actual capital will flow as well. So I would say I would bring it back up to where the policies are that incent, the permanency of the ability to actually invest and see that over time. Which back to the super productivity is fine, but it's a very short term, and there are many other things that need to be done there, along with the shred. Shred would be another example of that.
Thank you for that. And I do recall having a number of conversations with business owners who sometimes were found it inconvenient and an administrative burden to have the volume of reporting that they, in compliance. It forces them to allocate resources to that. Do you have any recommendations for us to alleviate that burden?
Very briefly, please.
Yeah, well, I'll say the first thing is it's startling. It's over $4 billion a year in a recent research report, which is 0.15% of GDP in terms of the actual cost of compliance and administrative burden.
Apologies, Ms. Wilding. I'm going to have to end it there. That concludes the time for this round.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kobina. We'll continue now with Mr. McDonald for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and good morning to all the witnesses attending this morning. I'll ask my first question to Ms. Vega. Ms. Vega, the Bill C-15 has the consumer-driven banking provisions and the development of the real-time rail. It's obviously intended to modernize our banking system in Canada, maybe long overdue. But on the other side of that, many senior rural Canadians rely on that face-to-face meeting with their banking institution. Can you speak to how we get the best of both worlds? So that do we need education? Who has to provide it? Like, the seniors are the most vulnerable to banking charges because of the nature of them doing transfers upon retirement and then more transfers upon death. So is there a way that we can get the best of both worlds?
Financial technology, as you know, is digital first. So I think when it comes to...
Your mic is not...
Is it working? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Financial technology companies are digital first. Many of them don't really have brick and mortar presence like a traditional bank, for example. But disruption is affecting everybody. The banks sometimes are closing branches, et cetera. And I think that you raise a good point that seniors and rural communities are perhaps more vulnerable. There's a big education piece that I think needs to happen, both on the government side, but also industry. And when you raise things like the RTR, for example, I really think that it's important for us to think about it as an ecosystem, right? No single thing or no single technology is operating in a silo, and no single market participant is operating in a silo. So we see it even on the regulatory side, right? So if you're developing regulations for open banking or for stable coins, a lot of this is dependent on whether or not we have a system that allows for that real-time movement of money, right? All these things are stacked. It's not separate things. And I would equally consider the risk equation as part of that shared responsibility for the entire ecosystem. So from our perspective, we have been very much pro-regulation. We have been an advocacy voice in favor of regulation, and one of the reasons why we supported the RPAA so strongly, because we believe that trust underpins our sector, and it's important for the customers to be protected and not be held liable when things go wrong. So, and that applies to all customers across Canada. So I would say, to your point, does this require more education, more collaboration? Absolutely. And I think I personally have taken that on to make sure that we are reaching across the aisle to the different participants to make sure that we're all in it together to protect the Canadian customer.
There we go. Maybe next I'll go to Ms. Oliver. Ms. Oliver, I'm very encouraged by you spoke about the fees and your goal with Wealthsimple to reduce banking fees. I run a business for over 40 years before I came to Parliament Hill, and banking fees annoyed me very much during running a business, especially simple things that you addressed in your opening remarks. So I just wonder if you could give me your opinion on just the presence of more options. We all hear competition is good. Is that going to make, and I won't name anyone, but the big five more responsible in their fee charging?
Well, I'll start. I think I see a real parallel to your comment about running a business and how things add up. Everything adds up. And also to touch on your comment about seniors and in person. There are people who are much more comfortable in person, and there are people who have mobility challenges who are grateful to be able to manage things remotely. Technology also brings security options. My mom loves being able to go into her Wealthsimple app and lock her credit card. It cannot be used because she can turn it on and off on her app. And lots of institutions have those features. And so long as there is a market demand, the market is well positioned to fill it. And so whether that is in-person service for people that prefer it, we have a group retirement savings plan that we initially launched to serve our own business. You saw last week CD Howe say that only 19% of small and medium-sized businesses offer workplace retirement savings plan, and that's a concern. Well,
Ms. Oliver, can you wrap up quickly, please?
Yes. We now serve 1,000 small and medium-sized businesses with retirement savings plans for their employees, $1 billion that their employees have saved. 95%
Thank you, Ms.
of them
Oliver.
did
We're going to
not
have
offer
to
those plans.
end it there. Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. That concludes the first hour of our meeting today. On behalf of the committee, I would like to thank all of our witnesses, both those in person and online. We will now briefly suspend as we change over for the next part of our meeting. Thank you very much. I would like to take a moment. Oh, where's my witness list? Here it is. I would like to take a moment to welcome our witnesses for this hour. We have Mr. Aaron Corey, the Chief Executive Officer for the Canada Infrastructure Bank, and he is joined by Mr. Frédéric Duguay, the General Counsel and Corporate Secretary for the CIB. Welcome. I would also like to just make a few brief comments for the benefit of our new witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, well, actually, it's just Monsieur Garon, you know what to do, so that's fine. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Mr. Corey, you have 5 minutes for opening remarks. Please go ahead.
Yes, am I on? Great. Good morning, Chair. Thank you, and thank you, honourable members, for the invitation to address the committee in relation to your study of C-15. As the Chair mentioned, I'm joined by our General Counsel and Corporate Secretary, Frédéric Duguay. C'est un plaisir de vous parler de la proposition.
It's a pleasure to speak to you about the proposals contained in C-15, designed to increase the Canada Infrastructure Bank's capital from $35 billion to $45 billion.
The CIB was created to help get infrastructure projects unstuck. Through our flexible financing, we address risk and affordability gaps that get in the way of important projects moving forward. And by crowding in private financing and coordinating with government granting programs, we make public dollars go further and deliver more of the infrastructure Canada needs to grow. With $28 billion of our initial $35 billion initial appropriation either committed under binding financing agreements or allocated to ongoing public energy procurements, the success of the CIB to invest in infrastructure projects across the country means it is starting to reach financial constraints. And this additional allocation, therefore, is very much welcome and necessary. It will allow us to continue on our ambitious program of investments in projects that deliver benefits to Canadians. Before we get into the questions, let me take a step back and just share a bit of the background on the CIB and our progress for committee members. Depuis que je me suis jointe à la BIC,
since I joined the organization in 2020, we have consistently made 20 to 30 investments annually. That's 3 to 4 billion of CIB money invested every year. And we expect that pace to increase given the critical importance of infrastructure to Canada's economic future.
I'm proud to report that as of today, we have made 108 loans to projects with a total project value of over $55 billion. We have projects in every province and territory, and our pipeline of future projects is healthy. More than 80% of our projects are currently in construction and support more than 300,000 Canadian jobs and other downstream domestic benefits for Canadian companies, workers, and supply chains. 11 of these projects are completed, and this number is growing each quarter. Different than a grant, the CIB makes loans and investments that are repaid with interest. And since July 2024, we have collected sufficient revenue to cover 100% of our operating costs. We are now a self-sustaining organization. En résumé, la BIC est un modèle qui fonctionne.
In short, the CIB rather, is a model that is working and delivering tangible benefits for Canadians, getting greenfield infrastructure built with minimal cost to taxpayers.
Range from a rail terminal in Alberta's industrial heartland to help move goods to the West Coast and onward to international markets, to a wind turbine and energy storage system in Nunavut to get an island community less reliant on diesel, to a biomass plant in a remote First Nation community in northern Quebec to ensure long-term energy security and economic development. For each project we finance, we look at the public benefits that this infrastructure delivers to Canadians. Growing the economy, decarbonizing key sectors, strengthening and diversifying trade corridors, building out the electricity grid and energy supply, closing the Indigenous infrastructure gap. These impact measures form the core of our investment decisions. And this brings me back to Budget 2025 and the proposal to increase the allocation by $10 billion. As I mentioned off the top, the CIB has almost $28 billion of its 35 allocated. If I can just describe that for a second, this represents $18 billion in legally binding credit agreements with project proponents and projects that are in construction, and an additional $10 billion in CIB term sheets with provinces and provincial utilities to support their ongoing renewable energy procurements. This pace of investments has been confirmed by the PBO in their 2025 report, which concluded that the CIB is on track to reach $37 billion in financial closes by 2930. And beyond our current mandate, Budget 2025 asks the CIB to do even more to address the country's infrastructure gaps. L'allocation budgétaire supplémentaire est nécessaire pour pouvoir remplir.
The additional budget allocation is necessary
to consider investments in any project referred to the Major Projects Office. And as committee members will understand, these are large, complex projects that will likely require financing from multiple public and private sources to advance. Opening access to financing from the CIB is just a natural, logical move to advancing these major projects. We've also been asked to consider investments in AI and data centers. This sector has significant infrastructure needs to support our long-term competitiveness and growth. We've also been asked to continue and accelerate our investments in Indigenous communities. To date, we have 33
Mr.
projects
Corey, if you
being
could wrap
financed.
up briefly, please.
I shall. Benefiting First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. Last year, we surpassed our initial $1 billion goal, and the budget increases this target to $3 billion. I welcome your questions. N'hésitez pas de me demander vos questions.
Please feel free to ask your questions.
We will begin now with Mr. McLean for 6 minutes.
Mr. Corey, welcome. And thank you for being here. And I take note of your comments that you've invested about $18 billion, according to your website, $17.9 billion, and you've got terms out potentially for another $10 billion. So out of a $35 billion allocation, you've allocated 18, and you might allocate 10 more. And yet the government has come and given you $10 billion more in this allocation for your needs or your wants down the road here about what you want to do to move forward an agenda that, can we say, might not be working, and I'll ask you some questions on that. But $18 billion, is this reflected anywhere in the government's deficit, first of all?
So, thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair. The way the CIB works, as the member points out, the CIB receives the allocation, the appropriation from government. As we make loans, we draw on our appropriation and loan that money to borrowers, and then we get paid back over time. The long-term fiscal impact of this should be, in our modeling, positive for the country.
If I can just quickly move there, if you were to do an audit of your investments right now, how many of them, of the $18 billion you've put out, would you have $18 billion of assets if they were accounted for on a valuation basis at this point in time?
Thank you for the question. So in our current, interesting question, in our current modeling, when you net three things, our investments minus all of our operating costs historically to date, minus any losses on loans for projects that have had challenges or risk, plus the interest we've currently accrued, our $18 billion, using round numbers, Madam Chair, would be something in the range, I believe, of $17.8 billion, so slightly below. When you forecast the interest to be earned from all of the existing loans, though, we are growing that portfolio, and our financial audited statements would show that over time we will be positive to the fiscal plan.
Let me ask about some in particular here, and let's go into the government this last week gave another $1.5 billion. I presume that's on top of the $10 billion for your electrification network strategy. But you've already been involved heavily in electrification through school buses, we call zero emission buses. And looking at your investments, particularly with Lion Electric in Quebec, it looks like your investments have been a abject failure because the company has gone bankrupt. So $50 million of money from the Strategic Investment Fund went into Lion Electric, along with $140 million of money from the government of Quebec to a company that quickly did a pump and dump, and the president took out $33 million and put it in his own pocket just before the company went bankrupt. To suggest that this is a success as far as your electric vehicle strategy goes, electric bus strategy, would be a stretch, wouldn't you say?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. Two things. Electric vehicle charging networks I'll talk about, and then I'll discuss fleets, if I may, Madam Chair. On charging, just to clarify, the announcement in the auto strategy that came out last week increased the government's target for us to invest up to $1.5 billion in electric vehicle charging. That is not new money. That is of our $45 billion as requested in the budget. That is the government as shareholders saying, of your $45 billion portfolio, we expect in the long term $1.5 billion of that to be in electric vehicle chargers. Previously, that target had been lower, and so they're just increasing that target from $500 million to $1.5 billion. We're a portfolio that's investing in sectors, and so government's job is to tell us where we should prioritize and how to allocate that portfolio between trade or energy or EV charging. So that's what the question. EV charging money is for.
No. So the question is, effectively, has this been a success as far as what you've shown in zero electric buses?
Thank you. So on fleets, just the question conflates two things. So just to be clear, we have no loans to Lion Electric or investments in them. Our loans are to the owners and operators of electric fleets, municipalities, municipal transit corporations, private school bus operators, for example, so that they can accelerate their transition from diesel to non-emitting fleets. And this program has been taken up by, as I say, municipal fleet operators and school bus operators across the country. There are over 5,000 buses under procurement and will be on the road. We think it's a success. Those buses are being bought from a range of companies, many Canadian, and creating supply chain and jobs. So yes, we think the program is a success.
Thank you. Well, let me point out that in the Lion Electric vehicles were pulled off the road because they were catching fire. The last thing I want to put my kids on when I send them to school is a bus that catches fire. Would you agree with that quickly?
Our job is to support fleet operators, municipal companies and school bus operators in making their fleet choices. We're a lender to their projects, but our job is to help them accelerate fleet investment and transition.
Yes. Thank you. I noticed you did invest in a fleet operator called Highland Electric Fleets, which is based in Beverly, Massachusetts. $50 million of Canada Infrastructure Bank money went to a U.S. company this past year. So effectively, we're subsidizing a U.S. arranger at this point in time to actually buy buses for fleets potentially in Canada, potentially elsewhere.
Thank you,
Any
Mr.
comments?
McLean. That concludes your time. We will continue now with Mr. McDonald for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Corey, for attending today, and Mr. Duguay. Just reading your bio before I came here today, you have a lot of years' experience now at the Canadian Infrastructure Bank. Can you just speak to what those experiences have learned you, like the lessons learned over the years? You've been there since 2020.
Thank you. I just passed my 5-year anniversary, and Frederick is, I believe, 7. So the CIB was launched, our first employee was hired in 2018, so we're still a relatively young organization, and I think we've learned a lot along the way. I'll tell you 3 things that I think have made a big difference for us in our journey. Number one, we have learned the power of collaborating with provinces, territories, municipalities. Infrastructure, Canada is a vast country and a sparse population, and the infrastructure needs across our country are varied. They're not the same in BC as they are in northern Quebec as they are in Northwest Territories. And so working with local owners of infrastructure, lots of the infrastructure in our country is owned by provinces, municipalities, and territories, and First Nations, Métis, and Inuit governments. So that's lesson number one. I think if you look at all of our big successes, they've come when we've worked really closely with others. That also includes working really closely with federal counterparts to make sure we're aligned to the policy goals of the shareholder. I think the second thing we've learned is that in our investments, there are two reasons infrastructure projects get stalled in this country that we can help solve. There are many reasons that infrastructure projects get stalled, but two, Madam Chair, that we can really address. One is the affordability of projects. Infrastructure projects often last 50, 75, 100 years, and there's a huge upfront cost to building them, and helping to manage that and the burden of that on today's ratepayers or users of the infrastructure and helping smooth that is one way we can help. The other is in help sharing in the risk that comes with projects, because projects, oftentimes you're building something for a long-term future. You're building a port for growth in traffic now till 2050. And the world is an uncertain place and how much that traffic is going to grow. So the CIB can help share in that risk. We can provide financing that says you will pay us back as the traffic ramps up or as the demand grows. And that's the kind of financing that a typical bank, someone who isn't a Crown like us with a long-term view, couldn't take. So that idea of affordability, managing the costs, and risk sharing is the lesson we've learned. So every investment, we look at it from those lenses. How can our money help manage cost and manage risk of the project? So there's two, at least, that I'll share with you.
Thank you. So we heard from my colleague across the way here, and he was trying to identify a black sheep. Can you kind of speak to the golden childs of your program, if you might?
Indeed. That question's kind of like saying, pick your favorite child. So I don't know, but Madam Chair, I'll do my best. I'll give you two examples of we like all of our projects, but I'll tell you about two. The first project the CIB invested in is the REM, the new transit line in Montreal. And I mention this one only because it has many of the hallmarks I mentioned. It's a collaboration, obviously, across levels of government and with the private sector, with an institutional investor, in this case, the Caisse de dépôt. It's a project that is now partially in service. Two of the three lines are operating. People are riding the transit. It is delivering real benefits, so you can see the other side of it. And it's transforming housing availability, livability in the city of Montreal in really meaningful ways. So that one is one that I continue to point at. A more recent one would be our Intertie project, which is a new transmission line between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. And the reason, Madam Chair, I would pick on this one is it has, again, all the hallmarks of great projects. It has, it's owned actually by a consortium of the power utility, Nova Scotia Power, the CIB is an equity investor in the project, and the First Nations, the Mi'kmaq of both Nova Scotia and New Brunswick are owners of the project. And together, from the start, they're designing where the line will go and how it will get built, creating jobs, economic development, and eventually ownership of the line for all of the Indigenous communities of both Nova Scotia and New Brunswick are going to own this line alongside us. And it's going to connect the grids, create more reliability, allow us to grow electricity supply, and move towards decarbonizing the grids, the energy supply in both Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. So there's two.
Well, I'm really pleased that you identified that one from Atlantic Canada, because I was probably going to bring it up. So thank you for that. You spoke in your opening remarks that you're in a position where you're self-sufficient today. Can you tell Canadians, the people listening at home, how the Canada Infrastructure Bank's revenues and its requirements for government appropriations work, and how you're covering your costs?
Yeah. So as I was mentioning, Madam Chair, to an earlier question, the way we work is we have this appropriation from government. We draw it down as we finance projects, and then we get repaid. And as we get repaid, of course, we're charging some form of interest. And so as our book of business has grown, as we were talking about earlier, we're up to $18 billion in financing agreements. As those draw money, and 11 of them, as I said, are completed, those projects are now paying us back with interest. And so that flywheel, the idea of this is it's a fund. It's an investment fund. So we will eventually, all $45 billion will come in, we'll put it out, we'll charge interest, and we'll do that again and again and finance hundreds of billions of dollars of projects in this country over the long term.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Corey. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. On va continuer pour 6 minutes avec Monsieur Garon, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Garon, 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair, and once again, welcome to all our witnesses. I'll go with Mr. Corey from the Canada Infrastructure Bank, and I'll continue with electrification of transportation and electric buses. In 2021, the bank had committed to investing $1.5 billion on zero-emission vehicles. What is the percentage of that money that has been invested? How much of that funding, 1.5, has already been invested?
Les autobus électriques.
What percentage of the 1.5 billion has been invested?
Mr. Duguay might be able to help me with this in a moment, but our program, to the best of my recollection, we have invested fully the $1.5 billion. It is committed to, as I say, partners across the country, and I believe.
Et quel pourcentage est investi au Québec?
And what percentage of that is invested in Quebec?
I'm sure I don't know the percentage of those investments that are in Quebec. If it's the committee's will, I can certainly provide that afterwards. We have on our website, we show each of our investments, so I could pull that information. But
Merci. Ouais, on a.
Thank you. Yes, we would appreciate that in writing. What percentage of the investment has been committed to electrical investments?
To the buyers of fleets, so municipalities and school bus operators, not directly to any one bus manufacturer. So the decision of where to buy their buses is the City of Edmonton's, the City of Ottawa's, the Durham Region's choice.
C'est possible de nous fournir la.
Would it be possible to provide us with a list of operators in Quebec with whom you have dealt? I understand that the program announced in 2021 was made up in part of infrastructure loans, but there was also a subsidy program administered jointly with Infrastructure Canada, but Quebec already had its own policy. The federal program didn't apply. Do you know whether Infrastructure Canada concluded an agreement in Quebec to provide its share of the funding to support businesses like Lyon?
Excusez-moi, Madame la Présidente, c'est au-delà de mon rôle, de mon poste au Québec. Lorsque nous avons travaillé sur des flottes municipales, surtout pour les bus scolaires, il y avait beaucoup d'intérêt. De ce côté-là, nous sommes engagés directement avec le gouvernement provincial.
Je m'excuse, je vais vous interrompre.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you because you're not answering the question. In your business, this comes within the ambit of your business ecosystem. There is an applicable Quebec program, so you have no idea. In a market where you have both feet planted, you have no idea whether there is an agreement between Infrastructure Canada and your bank.
In our loan program, our loans align with and complement the program that the government of Quebec has offered to school bus operators so that financing works together so that they can go ahead and change their fleets. Agreements between Infrastructure Canada and the province, as I say, they're not part of my role.
Vous savez pas. C'est correct. J'aimerais vous parler de.
Okay, you don't know. You were talking about the high-speed rail. That's a major infrastructure project. It qualifies. So I'd like to know whether the bank would be part of a high-speed rail project.
On the high-speed rail in the Quebec City to Toronto corridor, yes, I can confirm. The bank, early on in the analysis of that project in 2020, 2021, worked very closely with Transport Canada and also with VIA to analyze the potential for the project, the potential for private capital and institutional investment in that project.
Puis ça avait l'air de quoi, le potentiel?
What was that potential?
Absolutely, it's a project that meets all of our criteria. Now, of course, there's development work going on. Eventually, it's not an investment of the CIBs today, but it certainly could be in the future.
Est-ce que vous avez, là, à ce jour, des...
to date? Have you had any discussions with Alto to consider funding or participation in the project? Is that ongoing at the moment?
We stay in ongoing touch with our colleagues at Alto, and when the time comes, when they're actually at the stage of raising the equity and debt to finance the main project, it's something we will obviously look at. And so, yeah, we have regular, not frequent, but regular contact with them as they progress their project.
Parce que c'est un projet.
This is a project we're interested in. It's a major project, and Alto is saying that by the 2050, 25 million people will be taking the train. We know that there's no reason not to believe them. At CIB, you're looking for profitability and you have to be accountable. Have you done a cost-benefit analysis? Or is it not profitable enough? Is that why you haven't yet invested? Are you waiting?
The interesting thing about public transit projects at all levels, high-speed rail, it's true for municipal transit as well, is that the direct revenues they generate, fares, development around the line, is never going to fully pay for the transit. So you're always going to have a blended finance solution. The CIB has looked at early stages of studies of what the traffic volumes would be and what the profitability of it could be. And we think there's an investment opportunity for both us and pension funds for the project.
Thank you, Mr. Corey. Merci, Monsieur Garon. We will continue now for... Oh, sorry, my mic wasn't on. Apologies about that. Mr. McLean, you get 5 minutes.
We talked about the $50 to $55 million that you've loaned, as you would say, to the Beverly, Massachusetts Highland Electric Fleets. You also loaned $400 million to Quebec Bus Carriers Foundation, and you've loaned $15 million to Autobus Séguin. But there's more than $1 billion that's gone out to these zero-emission buses, and I suppose some of those may include line electric buses as well. The ones that definitely include line electric buses, would you say that those loans are a write-off at this point in time, including the one to the U.S. company?
Madam Chair, if I may, maybe just to address the question and also addresses the member's question at the tail end of his last comments. To be very clear, every one of our investments are in or partly in Canada, meaning if it was a bridge between Canada and the U.S., we could invest in that. But it must be infrastructure that's in Canada, and it must be infrastructure that benefits Canadians. Now, the owners of that, the companies that deliver that, we live in a global world. There are companies that come from around the world and do business in Canada, and as Canadians, we benefit that. But our loans benefit Canadians and Canadians only. So in the earlier question, they could not use the loan, for instance, to buy buses that would be on the roads in the U.S. They must benefit Canadians. That's the purpose of our financing is and always is.
Is it a write-off?
Madam Chair, to the second part of the question, sorry, no our financial statements are very clear about what are our current financial write-offs, but I can confirm that most of our investments in electric fleets continue to be viable investments, and we intend to collect.
To the president of the Canadian Infrastructure Bank that Lion Electric went bankrupt. So any money that was going into their taxpayer money that funded the acquisition of these vehicles is effectively nil at this point in time. And I'll pivot here, if you don't mind, Mr. Corey, because there was actually an arrangement made behind the scenes with Lion Electric Vehicles, which included a bank syndication with Bank of Montreal. BMO is one of the signatories on there. Interesting there is that BMO, Bank of Montreal, has an arrangement with Export Development Corporation to make sure that they never have to suffer any losses on their loan portfolio. So effectively, it is the people of Canada underwriting bad investments that are facilitated by your organization without any oversight. Is this proper due diligence on your organization's part, or are you part of the effort to kind of work through the capital here and make sure Canadian taxpayers are always at risk in these programs?
Madam Chair, I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but I'll say this. We conduct on every loan full due diligence. Our borrowers, in the case of electric fleets, our borrowers who are the fleet operators sign on to acquiring electric buses, decarbonizing their transportation, and paying us back out of the operating savings that come in reduction in fuel use, reduction of maintenance. And so that's the due diligence we focus on and do on each and every investment.
So It looks like you've written off $50 million of a loan to a U.S. entity that was going to look at doing some business in Canada. And you've written off what might be $400 million for another investment in electric vehicles in Quebec and another $15 million, and probably more of this whole fleet, zero electric buses concept that you've lent towards. The beneficiaries of this, of course, are a bunch of intermediaries. And with Lion Electric, as we've clearly shown, the beneficiaries were the insiders. Now, as one of those insiders, André-Lise Matteau on your board.
Madam Chair, I have, first of all, just to dispute the very premise of the question, I've never said anything. Your comments about what we have or haven't written off are not matched. So just to be clear, those are not all projects we've written off.
Bankrupt company, you haven't written off your investment in them.
We don't have an investment in that company. I think, Madam Chair, I've been quite clear. I don't have a loan to them. So the premise of the question doesn't feel.
Loan to the people that were arranging to buy those vehicles.
We have a loan to people arranging to buy non-emitting buses and put them on the road. And by the way, this is an important point. The way our loans all work, when we sign a financing agreement, the agreement is that they can draw money as they actually make progress, as buses are on the road. Or to pick a different example, if I made a loan to someone doing broadband, they would only, I may make a $100 million finance agreement, they only draw money as they build the infrastructure.
What's the write-off?
Our financial statements are very clear on what write-offs we do and don't take. I'm happy to provide those to the committee if you wish.
Thank you, Mr. Corey. Thank you, Mr. McLean. That concludes the time. We will continue with Mr. Sawatsky for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Corey, for coming today, and Mr. Duque as well. I'm very excited to hear about investing in the right way. You mentioned the electrical intertie and just growing the electrical grids and supply. I think that's really important going forward. I come from British Columbia. We, of course, have a lot of hydroelectric. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to the importance of expanding the electrical grid, maybe tie it into BC. In my own municipality, New Westminster, the municipality actually has its own electrical grid there. So maybe just speak to the importance of growing our electricity supply at this moment in time.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. It is such a critical time for us to be investing in our electricity supply, both generation, storage, and grid. And I think for two basic reasons. One, the electrons are the lifeblood of a growing economy. So our investments in British Columbia, for instance, our investments in electricity are also investments in growing the critical mineral sector in the northwest or the energy sector in the province, or the competitiveness of businesses who are manufacturers. Same as in other parts of the country, whether that's data centers or energy production, electrons are the lifeblood of that. And the second reason is we need to grow our grid while also decarbonizing the stuff we do have and moving off, for instance, not in BC, but in other parts of the country, moving off of coal. So we've got to replace stuff. To be very simple, we've got to replace a bunch of the stuff we have and then build a bunch of new stuff. And that is what's putting a real burden on the affordability of these investments on Canadians, because all of that eventually falls on ratepayers, electricity payers in the country. So we're very focused on this. Building good transmission grids also helps that, because you can now spread out the generation, build reliability, so those interties and grid investments are also really important, and battery storage and other forms of storage also kind of form the balancing act. But those investments are core to the CIB. We recently have passed $5 billion in investment in that space and continue forward.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Maybe if you could just dive even a little bit further in here, just speak to the efficiencies that electrification provides, such as getting heat pumps in homes, more EV chargers, people having maybe even batteries within their homes. How can that kind of improve the efficiency and even affordability of people's daily lives in Canada?
Well, Madam Chair, thank you. The interesting thing, as you say, is these things all do feed on each other. So the CIB has investments in clean power and battery storage and transmission. We also have investments, as you point out, in high-speed electric vehicle charging networks across the country. And as one of the earlier questions pointed out, We are planning on accelerating that, linked to the automotive strategy that was recently released. Industrial decarbonization of our building stock is a really important part of what the CIB is also doing. So we have this program called Building Retrofits, where we're working with building owners to convert to heat pumps, to move off of fossil generation for their heating and cooling, to retrofit their buildings, potentially also to convert their buildings in some jurisdictions towards, for instance, from office to residential. We've seen that in some markets. So what I'm saying is there's a real chain of investment from the generation and the electricity system into the end use, whether that's chargers, decarbonizing buildings. So together, I think those investments are building the core of what we're going to need to be both economically competitive and meet our climate goals in the future.
Thank you. Sorry, Chair, how long do I have left? 1 minute. Okay. Maybe if I can ask two really quick questions. In my own riding, I've got a lot of extensive rail lines going through, CN Rail, CPKC, SRY. So if you could just speak briefly to investing in the trade corridor investments.
So one of our investment sectors is in trade and transportation corridors. I know you're riding well only from the rail maps, because it is one of the more congested, busier parts of the country, and we've certainly been looking at ways to debottleneck and grow trade all the way through, not just at the port, but if you work your way back up through the rail network. We've invested in inland facilities. I mentioned in one of my earlier comments a facility in the heartland outside Edmonton, which is really to help shippers get their products more quickly to port. So it's a rail handling and logistics yard. We've made investments, obviously, on the passenger side of rail, but we're looking very much at other logistics handling facilities inland to complement, again, if you follow the whole chain, to complement our port investments that we've made in Prince Rupert or in Montreal or that we're looking to make in Vancouver.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Corey. Thank you, Mr. Sawatsky. On va continuer avec M. Garon pour 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Garon, 2.5 minutes. Thank you. I'll carry on with the Canada Infrastructure Bank. A few moments ago, you concluded saying that the high-speed rail was an investment opportunity. So that is a bit hollow. How can it be an investment opportunity, and if you didn't seize it, why haven't you seized it?
Appreciate the chance to clarify. So to be clear, the high-speed rail in that corridor is a project that has huge benefits to Canadians. It meets all of our criteria for investment. It's a project the CIB has been working on in the earlier phases of developing the project. And when the time comes, it certainly would make sense as a project that we, alongside private capital, would invest in. The only answer to the member's question is that it isn't yet time for a CIB investment. It's premature, but we remain in discussion with them, and when the time is right, I suspect it'll be a project we'll be very proud to be investors in.
Ouais, peut-être une petite question de suivi parce que.
Perhaps a brief follow-up. There's already capital. We know that the Caisse de dépôt de placement du Québec, which is a partner of yours, we know that the Caisse has already invested in the project. So why is it? Well, I'm trying to understand how you function. If this is the right time for the Caisse in Quebec, but it's not the right time for the Infrastructure Bank, why is that? I have difficulty understanding why you're lagging behind. Thank you for the question.
Yes, it's really exciting that there is progress happening, early works, as we call it in the infrastructure business, on the ground in early phases. But the project is still, just to answer the member's question, the project is still in the process of finalizing what is the total cost of the project and the construction schedule and the contract.
Pensez-vous qu'il y a une probabilité très rapide?
Do you think there's any probability that the project won't actually happen?
It's not a question of whether the project will, it's when is the project mature enough that it's ready for a project financing. So typically in project financing, you would have finalized the design, costing for all segments of the line, and you'd go out and raise the billions of dollars that we're going to raise to invest in the project.
La Caisse de dépôt serait peut-être allée trop vite.
Thank you, Mr. Garon. That your time has expired.
For 5 minutes, please.
Canadian Infrastructure Bank was established. Canadians were told that it would have $35 billion dispersed by fiscal 27-28. Is the bank on track to reach that target?
Madam Chair, thanks for the question. Per the most recent analysis of the PBO, we're on track to achieve $37 billion by 2930.
Dispersed, not committed, dispersed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very, very, very fair question. So let me just, I talked earlier a bit about our funnel. Maybe this is I will do this just for a moment more. So if you think of our investments, we talk to projects across the country. We eventually, after identifying a project, understanding its in mandate, I promise.
But you didn't answer the question, and now you're giving a lot of preamble to, was it yes or no, are you going to meet that target? Are you going to have $35 billion dispersed by 2028?
So quite simply, we sign contracts, we disperse money as construction happens, as I think Canadians would want us to do.
Okay, no, wait a minute.
Today,
wait a minute. Canadians were told by the government that you would have that money dispersed by 27, 28. So I'm just asking if that's going to happen. If it's not, in fact, we'll take it that it will not. What are you on track to disperse by 27, 28?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. So as of today, to be clear, just on the question of disbursements, $18 billion in contracts signed. Today, we have $7 billion or so cash dispersed. So to the question that's been asked, cash gets dispersed as construction progresses. Every quarter, someone sends us an invoice and we disperse. We're at about $7 billion now. I don't know the forecast to 2 years out, but I can say that over the last...
Are you familiar? Do you know what the PBO's estimation was?
I do not off the top of my head.
14.9. That's what the PBO said on page 1 of their report. Is that projection higher or lower than it was in 2021? Are you tracking? Like, are you getting better or worse at hitting the targets that the government states publicly?
Right. So, just to be clear, the original baseline that you're comparing against is from 2017 when the CIB was launched. The idea that the disbursements would happen by 27, 28. Yeah. We're rapidly accelerating. So right now, we have drawing somewhere between.
Right, but you are nowhere near what was promised. Let's look at this another way now. What proportion of private sector investment to public sector investment were Canadians promised when this bank was established?
Well, again, I think, Madam Chair, the best thing for me to do is just talk about where we are.
No, the best thing to do is answer questions. Officials have to answer questions when they come to committee. So I'd like you to answer my question.
Sure. Madam Chair, thank you. Thanks for the question. The original concept of the bank is that for every dollar we invest, there will be 3 to 4 times the amount of private capital. The important thing to note... the fall economic statement wherein the bank was established actually said 4 to 1. And Bill Morneau in his speech on it said 5 to 1, 4 to 5 to 1, so not 3 to 1. But the next question is, what is the current proportion of private sector investment to public? Right. Thank you, Madam Chair. So it's an interesting question. I will answer the question of the member very directly, but you have to take 2 parts of my answer, if that's okay. Part 1, today there's $25 billion aligned against our $18 billion. So you might say that's 1.4 times to 1. The way you have to think about these investments, though, is over time. So we make an investment, and at the outset of the investment, when we make the loan, that's the ratio. Over time, as we're paid back and private capital replaces us, so on every one of our projects, over time, that ratio changes. Our forecast is that we are well on track to be at 4 to 1 over the lifetime of the loans.
But you're moving the goalposts in these answers. I'm going back to what Canadians were promised and told when this institution was established and what its projections are and what various ministers have said publicly. So would you suggest or would you agree that it is fair for Canadians to be extraordinarily skeptical about the claims the government makes about the efficacy of this bank when none of the commitments that the government made have actually unfolded over time since your bank was established?
Madam Chair, thank you. A
very brief response, please.
Sure. I dispute the premise of the question. What Canadians were promised is that these projects would draw in 3 to 4 times their private capital. That's what they're on track to do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Corey and Mr. Kelly. That concludes the time for this round. We'll continue with Mr. Letao for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning to you both. I apologize for my voice. I'm in the process of losing it. Many considerations here. A quick comment. Electric buses from Lyon, are they still, well, they're still rolling. I see them every day in my riding. I see the buses go by, and they're not catching fire.
The company went bust, but the buses were sold, and now there's a company has taken over, and so the maintenance of the buses is assured. So I don't see there's a problem that the Quebec government will have to look into about the operations of the company, but the product, the buses, they actually run and run well. Now, Mr. Corey, you were talking, you were trying to explain earlier, so I'd like to give you the chance to perhaps complete that explanation about the disbursed versus committed funding, the way in which you operate.
Thank you. Thanks for the question, and thanks, Madam Chair. The functioning of the bank is actually very clear on this point. We negotiate terms of investments, sign binding financing agreements, and then cash gets drawn in behind those as progress is made. And as I was saying earlier, this is, I think, actually what all taxpayers would want us to do. It means that our money only is actually dispersed as the construction happens, as the benefits are realized for Canadians. So it is absolutely true that there's a lag between those two things as we've ramped up activities. The CIB launched in 2018 and made our first loan then, but really after a few years of startup, it's only been in the last 4 or 5 years that we've made investments. As I said, when I joined the CIB 5 years ago, the CIB had made one investment. We've now made 108. So we're really on that curve, and now the draws are happening. And if you look each quarter now, draws are happening between $750 million and $1 billion of actual cash out the door. So we've accelerated. The member's question compared against the original forecasts of 2017 and disbursement, and it's true we lag behind those, but we're now at a pace where borrowers of ours are drawing every quarter, and so, as I said, I think this is actually the model we would want to see, so that our money only goes out the door if and when real benefits are realized by Canadians.
Okay, thank you. And I guess that's one of the reasons why, for example, with the high-speed train project, the ALTO project, of course, there's no money going out the door yet because the tracks haven't been laid yet. So the project is not in the construction phase. When it gets to that stage, then we'll see what happens. But certainly the time is not now, as was back in 2017 with the REM, which in that case was the project was underway. And things have changed quite a bit since 2017, and I think the current version of the CIB is quite different. Let's put it that way, than it was then. One thing that is in your mandate, and this ties to the group that will come after, regards your commitments to working with First Nations. So if I understand correctly, there's $1.5 billion. Could you tell us how that process is going?
Sure, yeah. So something that's been a really important part of the bank's growth and something we're really proud about. We've almost a third, 33 of our investments are either directly in partnership or to the benefit of Indigenous communities. We do it in two ways, and so, Madam Chair, maybe I'll just very briefly speak about that. One is we make what we call Indigenous community infrastructure investments. So these are smaller loans typically in community. So wastewater treatment plants, clean power to reduce reliance on diesel, roads to allow for new housing development. So these are loans directly in community to help close the infrastructure gap. The second kind of investment we're making in that 1.5, so that's part of it. The other part in the 1.5 billion is equity loans, where we have loaned money to Indigenous communities so that they can buy stakes in infrastructure projects. So this would be particularly true in things like renewable power, where in many parts of the country, renewable power projects are being done in partnership between wind and solar developers and Indigenous communities. And so we've made loans to the Indigenous community so that they can buy and own a meaningful stake in those projects. And this is progress we're really proud of.
Thank you very much, and I think that my time is up.
Perfect. 5 minutes on the dot. OK, on va continuer maintenant avec Monsieur Lefebvre pour 5 minutes.
Mr. Lefebvre, 5 minutes.
Mr. Corey, as you know, both of us work for Canadians and taxpayers. Could you kindly share with Canadians what your compensation is?
That's
a fair and transparent question.
Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you.
My phone. Go ahead.
Make sure that our phones are on silent, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Compensation at the CIB is published annually in our annual report. All of our executive compensation is published. We're very transparent, and so the member, I'm happy to share afterwards with the member all of our compensation if it's so desired.
How much did you get compensated last year in the last fiscal year? Base salary and bonus?
My compensation is open and transparent, and it's published on the internet.
Just the number, if you can. It is a public number, public information. I have the number, but I'd like you to just share with us.
My compensation is set by our board every year. They benchmark against the public markets, and they pay me well in range of what CEOs are paid in other parts of the world.
Okay. Mr. Corey, could you share with Canadians what your compensation is?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. As said, my compensation is public. It's benchmarked
Corey,
every year by our board and set.
Mr.
And
Corey,
I agree, I work for taxpayers and I work...
I'm sorry, I have to ask you, why are you refusing to share your compensation? It is taxpayers' money that contributes to your compensation. They deserve to know, so can you please share with them?
My compensation is a matter of public record, and I take my duty as a worker for taxpayers seriously.
Your compensation is in the range of $553,000 and $651,000, and you are entitled to an incentive, a bonus, of 50% of your base. So you could be making around $1 million. Could you justify that? What metric justifies that level of compensation for someone who is working in the public sector?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I am, as the questioner points out, as the member points out, I've worked in public service both at the provincial and federal level for about a dozen years, and I take it really seriously and with pride. I think the work that the CIB is doing does deliver value to Canadians. I think what we're doing is blending between private finance and public interest in a way that's unique, and so I think the benefit to Canadians is very clear.
Mr. Corey, sorry, I'm asking about the compensation and how to justify it. As you know, we have an affordability crisis. I find it unjustifiable to have a compensation, for someone to have a compensation of close to $1 million. And I am asking you to justify that for Canadians, particularly during this time.
I thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I think for all compensation, it's based on markets and competitive benchmarking. My board does that each year and provides a compensation, recommends to the, actually, I should say recommends to the government, which then sets through an OIC my compensation range. And I think that's a transparent and fair system to compensate people, not just me, but all people, in a way that's somewhat linked to the market, but also recognizes that we're doing public service.
Okay, so you think it's justified for you to be getting paid up to $1 million?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I think that my compensation reflects my work experience and the market and the competitive environment that we work in, but it also reflects that we work in public service. And so it is well under what CEOs of
Mr. Corey,
private financial institutions
I don't think Canadians will buy that. Madam Chair, I will share my time with MP McLean. Thank you.
Madam Chair?
You have about 45 seconds.
Okay. Back to
Appel au règlement, Madame la Présidente.
Point of order, Madam Chair. Yes, Mr. Garon. I apologize for interrupting my Conservative colleagues, but refusal to answer a question when the witness knows the answer is a violation of a parliamentary privilege. I understand that the witness can answer as he wishes, but this is someone being paid with public money and is refusing to answer a parliamentarian's question when he knows the answer. Is it not a breach of our parliamentary privilege to show such contempt for a member of Parliament? Thank you, Mr. Garon, for that point of order. I will take a moment to confer with the clerk.
Si.
So just going to the rules here, witnesses must answer all questions put to them. A witness may object to a question asked by an individual committee member. So, you know, it really, there was a response, even if it was unsatisfactory to the members. Thank you for that. We will continue with Mr. McLean for 45 seconds.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Corey. Back where we were. The issue we have here is that your organization acts as a more or less facilitator for insiders to make a lot of money, including Marc-Andre Bedard, who made $33 million by extracting his shares out of Lion Electric, while the government, through strategic investment funds and your organization, were pumping money into the organization, more or less lifting it up, and therefore, no business case whatsoever at that point in time. People made money, people on the inside made money, including people that were on your board. Do you have any due diligence that looks after these things, any conflict of interest procedures that you need to look at?
That concludes your time. Thank you, Mr. McLean. We will continue with Mr. Fragiskatos for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Corey, first of all, thank you for your public service at both the provincial and federal level. Anything you wish to clear up here, sir? There's been a lot of accusations. We just heard conjecture, what amounts to conjecture, I think. Anything you wish to put on the table that I think would allow for a fair testimony to be on the record?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. I think I would, if it's okay, I'd love to address the question of conflict of interest. It's a very important one. It's one we take extremely seriously. I'm going to pass to my colleague, Mr. Jiguet, to just talk about how we do ensure that in all of our investments, we meet the highest standard of ethical review, due diligence, and conflict of interest checks.
So to confirm the Madam Chair, the member's question, we do not have an agreement with Lion Electric. I think that has been said several times by Mr. Corey. With respect to conflict of interest, as Mr. Corey says, we adopt the highest standards in public sector governance with respect to conflict of interest. All of our directors are not only subject to the Conflict of Interest Act in Canada, they're also subject to a conflict of interest code for directors that goes beyond the requirements of disclosure under the Conflict of Interest Act. Before every committee, we provide a very detailed list of all the projects that are submitted to our board for approval. That includes all of the counterparties, not just the borrower, but other counterparties that would be part of a project, because in project financing, you'll generally have a major construction company or other companies that are part of material contracts with respect to that project. Directors review that project list, proactively disclose any relationships that they would have with respect to any of these counterparties on investments, and we manage conflicts in meetings consistent with the requirements of the Conflict of Interest Act, with recusal, which includes leaving the room and not participating in any discussion and voting on matters. So we're happy to, and we have more information on that in our annual report with respect to our process and our disclosures, as well as our codes of conduct that are also available on our website.
Thank you very much. And to whoever wishes to take it, this would then be in line with other G7 countries, counterpart in the United Kingdom, the counterpart organization there. You have put in place a framework that really aligns with the expectations that would exist on behalf of citizens, certainly, but in terms of basic standards adhered to or upheld by governments and similar organizations such as the Canada Infrastructure Bank. I point to the UK. You can give other examples.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Madam Chair. It is interesting, the concept of an infrastructure bank in general. To your point about controls, I'll let Mr. Duguay speak in a moment, but just to be clear, an infrastructure bank, a blended finance tool that helps support infrastructure projects is actually, to the member's point, and he has an advantage having been the parliamentary secretary at one point and knowing this space very well, I know, not only the UK, but if you were to look at Germany, the Scandinavian countries, Australia, Singapore, Scotland, individual states in the U.S., there are many who have all adopted some version of a model where there's a public institution like the CIB making investments in risk-sharing ways to help spur more infrastructure investment, blending public and private. So this idea is not new, it's not Canadian only. I think what we have done is we have, when we look around the world, the infrastructure bank actually, alongside peers like the UK, like KfW in Germany, like the Nordic Bank, I think are leaders in this area. But we are far from alone. In terms of the controls we put in place, I'll let Mr. Duguay speak to how that compares to other jurisdictions.
As Mr. Corey says, we do benchmark our practices, as I said earlier, with comparable organizations in the public sector, not only in Canada, but internationally. That's reflected. An example of that is the work that we do around transparency with respect to having a consistent process on disclosure. So disclosure of projects in which we've made investments. If you go on our website, Mr. Corey mentioned that we've reached financial close on 108 projects. You can go on our website and have detailed disclosure that is consistent across all the projects with respect to the CIB investment amount, the project description, other information on the project, including its impacts. So that aligns with, as Mr. Corey said, best practices that are adopted, for example, by the Nordic Investment Bank.
Thank you, Mr. Duguay. We'll have to conclude it there. We will conclude this hour with 2 minutes et demie de Monsieur Caron, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Monsieur Corey, vous avez été, en fait, avec C15, on va recapitaliser la Banque d'infrastructure du Canada. On va faire passer votre capitalisation en termes d'argent public de 35 à 45 milliards. J'aimerais savoir si ça correspond à une demande faite par la Banque d'infrastructure du Canada ou si c'est tout simplement le gouvernement qui vous est arrivé avec ça. Puis quand il a déposé le budget, vous avez eu une bonne journée, vous avez souri, vous avez ouvert le champagne. Est-ce que ça vient de vous?
Thank you for the question. Thank you, Madam Chair. No champagne in our workplace, but we'll say that we have been providing ongoing visibility of our pipeline of future investments. So as I said, we have 18 billion closed. We have another 10 under term.
Je veux dire, la question, c'est est-ce que vous l'avez demandé au gouvernement?
The question is, did you ask for that?
The answer is we've been providing to the government forecasts of what our upcoming set of investments are and when the $35 billion will be fully committed. And given the government's focus on
Excellent. Vous l'avez demandé. Non, ça va, Monsieur Corey, vous l'avez demandé.
That's fine, Mr. Corey. You did ask for it. What about when it comes to investment in home building, residential construction? They have built Canada Homes. We don't know too much how that will work. So what might the CIB's role be in those projects? Will you be working with Build Canada Homes? Will you be a partner? When will you become involved in the process? You have 45 seconds.
Thank you for the question. Yes, one of our areas of investment is in what we call housing enabling infrastructure. So that means water and wastewater systems, roads, the transit that allows for more housing, district energy, all of the infra that goes around housing. We have already been in this space. We've made investments to date that we believe enable the construction start of about 20,000 homes. It's a start. To answer the question, we plan on working very closely with Building Canada Homes to help accelerate housing development. So we see our role as really working on the enabling infra side, getting the water pipes in the ground, the district energy in the ground, the transit solutions there so that density can happen and housing can get built.
Merci.
Okay, merci, Monsieur Garon. On behalf of the committee, I would like to thank our witnesses from the Canada Infrastructure Bank. Before we suspend briefly for the final hour of our meeting today, I would just like to remind all committee members that to keep their phones on silent. It appeared at the beginning of Ms. Kobina's intervention that she had somebody on the phone, and I would ask that we be respectful. It
wasn't
was
somebody
Siri
on the phone.
who said that?
Yes. It was not. I did not have somebody.
Okay,
on the
so
phone.
anyways, I would really ask everyone to be respectful of other members and witnesses at committee and to keep their phones on silent. I think it's a privilege for us to be able to have our devices with us. Thank you very much, and we will suspend briefly as we change over. If I could have your attention, please, colleagues. Colleagues, we're going to get started. Thank you. I would ask, okay, both Conservative and Liberal members, we're going to get started. Thank you very much. I would like to welcome our next round of witnesses. We have National Chief Cindy Woodhouse Nepinak from the Assembly of First Nations, and she is joined by Bram Lorette, the Senior Director, as well as Josh Gladstone, the Interim Director for Housing and Infrastructure. Ms. Woodhouse, Chief Woodhouse, you have 5 minutes to begin. Thank you very much.
Chair, I'd like to, first of all, give my absolute love to the community of Kitigan ZB, who's lost children to gun violence, as well as to Tumbler Ridge, the victims there. Can I ask for a moment of silence for the victims and for everybody to pray in their own way, in a good way, and remember that we've got children out there that are affected across this country this week. So I ask for that, Chair, in a respectful way.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll take a moment of silence. Thank you very much, Chief. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you. Anin buju apachikachinandam akanakabi jaya no manungum chimigwech. Good morning. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Cindy Woodhouse Nepinak. I'm the National Chief for the Assembly of First Nations. I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered here in the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabeg Nation. Thank you to the committee for the invitation to appear today in this critical study of Bill C-15. We are pleased to support the Assembly of First Nations technical brief in response to this Omnibus Budget Implementation Act, which includes comments on Part 5, Divisions 1, 3, 5, 32, 33, 35, and 44. November's federal budget was an opportunity to demonstrate through deeds, as we recall at the opening of Parliament that King Charles was here and he said through deeds, that First Nations voices matter to this new administration. In the lead up to the budget, when asked about reports of First Nations budget cuts, Canada reassured chiefs they understood more needed to be done and not less. Sadly, that promise was broken, and the 2025 federal budget represents a significant setback. When the best we can say is that Indigenous services are only being cut by $2 to $3 billion, we know that there is a problem, especially when provincial transfers across this country for health, education, and social services increased by 5%. Those increases never hit First Nations. They never think of us. Instead of closing gaps between First Nations and Canadians, this budget makes things more difficult. So to start, we highlight examples of sunsetting programs not being renewed in this budget. The Indian Residential School Resolution Health Support Program, for one. The Indian Day School Health Support Program. Mental wellness teams and opioid treatment support. Support for vulnerable First Nations children accessing Jordan's Principle. Over 300 First Nations adult education programs. No matter how you look at it, less is not more. These sunsetting programs must be extended. First Nations have been told to be patient. Another plan has been promised. Just trust us. And we sit here today, 6 weeks from the expiration of these vital programs. We see no plan before us. Now First Nations are demanding answers. Looking at what is being implemented in the Omnibus Act, we are equally concerned. As an example, Part 5, Division 1 raises many red flags. This looks like an end run around statutory safeguards this Parliament established to address concerns about Cabinet's unchecked power in Bill C-5. All Canadian laws, including their final content and process of development, must be compliant with Section 5 of Canada's United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. Despite Canada's claim that free, prior, and informed consent were at the heart of that bill, these vital references remain absent in this legislation. In the case of this bill's Red Tape Reduction Act, we have concluded that excluding First Nations from the development of this law is likely to result in strong legal challenges. Another concern we have with this act is a strong trend towards devolution of federal authority. While First Nations are clearly within federal jurisdiction, Canada continues to delegate authority and fiscal responsibility to provinces through program design and funding flows. In addition to eroding federal accountability and fragmenting service delivery, this approach is fundamentally inconsistent with nation-to-nation relationships. Devolution of federal authority goes against the principles of substantive equality and unfairly forces First Nations to compete with provinces for health, education, and police funding. Build Canada Homes, for instance, is a recent example of a federal initiative that could deliver for First Nations through a distinctions-based funding approach. In light of this, I appreciate Minister Robertson's verbal commitment to set aside a minimum funding of 10% to finally start addressing the First Nations housing gap. And I do ask the Minister to have that in writing with First Nations, because if not, we get left out. We also recommend that C-15 go further and mandate distinctions-based program design and First Nations participation in governance. Finally, it is worth noting November's budget was introduced on the one-year anniversary of the passing of one of our First Nations great leaders, Justice Murray Sinclair. After documenting the truths of Canada's horrific residential school system, Justice Sinclair called on us to get up and to do the work of reconciliation. He described the mountain we needed to climb. He showed us the path to the top, but he also said that it was up to all of us to do the climbing. That climb rests with all of us now, everyone in this room, on this committee. In Justice Sinclair's name, we must keep imagining what a world looks like, where all of us have medicines, food, and a safe place to live. Not just a few of us, but truly all of us, because budgets are not just accounting exercises, these are lives. They are important instruments as well for governments to deliver on their obligation to protect the rights of all citizens. We hope you listen and respond through both words and deeds, as the King had said when he had opened up Parliament. And I look forward to seeing him later this year, and I want to tell him that we're working together and finding progress. So we look forward to your questions. Miigwech.
Thank you, Chief. We will now begin with 6 minutes from Mr. Schmale. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you again to National Chief for being here and for your testimony here today. National Chief, you talked about investments from ISC into housing. And what we've seen since 2015 is, yes, the budgets within ISC has gotten bigger. The outcomes, as outlined by many Auditor General's reports, show that housing is getting worse in community. Infrastructure, roads, community centers, that type of thing is getting worse. We're seeing an increase in crime, mental health, etc. So we're seeing an increase in funds, but the outcomes are actually going in the complete opposite direction. And you touched on it a bit in your testimony and in previous testimonies before the Indigenous Northern Affairs Committee. The system itself is broken when you have that Ottawa knows best attitude, where we continue to have Indigenous leaders coming to Ottawa asking for funds only to get a little bit back. But the bureaucracy seems to be feeding this machine here. Maybe you can comment on that, and I'll get to my next series of questions.
Well, I'm going to give that to one of my technicians, but I will say first and foremost, Indian Affairs, and I'm going to call it Indian Affairs. You guys, Parliament changes that name over and over again now to Indigenous Services. And that's cutting in by bringing other groups of people. We need to be focused on First Nations in this country. We need to quit funding other Indigenous or whatever groups of people that people make up for themselves. Focus on First Nations people directly. All of a sudden, the name changes to Indigenous Services Canada. It used to be Indian Affairs. I still call it Indian Affairs. And it needs to get back to that, if that's what it was created to do, because we're the only ones put under the Indian Act. No other group, Métis aren't, other groups in this country aren't, but First Nations are. And what little pots of money we have, there's other groups of people taking from that. So ISC needs to stop funding other groups of people other than First Nations out of the limited pots that they have. That's the problem. Anyways.
I actually don't want to lose that momentum that you just mentioned. So and I will let your colleague here respond. So what we're seeing, the previous meeting we just had about an hour ago was talking about S2, the second generation cutoff. We have a piece of legislation, C10, currently going through the legislative process here, the Modern Treaty Commissioner. With both pieces of legislation, it seems that, you know, when it comes to the Modern Treaty Commissioner specifically, the government could live up to its word when signed, either modern treaty or otherwise, but it just, and this has been hundreds of years, right? This isn't recent. It seems that the departments just don't want to. They could. We've seen during COVID how fast a department can move when they really want to, but it, you know, the second generation cutoff, the department could you know, wrap up consultation or speed up consultation and move that forward. There just seems to be no follow through here.
Well, first time in many years, we're finally going to have a First Ministers meeting with the provinces, the feds, and with First Nations to finally, I'm thankful to the Prime Minister and the premiers for that commitment. But this is the first time ever. Isn't that terrible? And we end up with jurisdictional issues. But when it comes to funding itself, we have to make sure that we're focused on First Nations and not all these other groups of people that are eating up the pots of that are meant for First Nations people.
But when you have a growing bureaucracy here in Ottawa, when you have a department like the ISC has doubled in size, I'm not even bringing in Crown Indigenous relations either, it has doubled in size and the number of bureaucrats, the number of reporting forms for every single program you think would be standardized, but they're all different. Like, there are efficiencies here where we could see maybe a reduced bureaucracy, more direct funding to nations themselves to let them decide their own path at their own speed. But it just seems we're just feeding this machine here, this cotton candy machine here in Ottawa, where the money just goes around and around, and you know, what comes out is not what should be.
I think, you know, I'm going to say that ISK does a lot of good work, but there is also, you know, leakage to other groups of people that needs to stop. That's for sure. But, you know, I think that I've got technicians beside me that are absolute experts, and we're in a dilemma here because we're a few days away from program sunsetting, and that's very worrisome for First Nations. So, I don't know, Bram, if you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Schmel. I'd be very curious to hear where you're getting your numbers from. Our understanding, based on the work that we've done for housing through Indigenous Services Canada, is that we're looking at significant distinctions-based investments since Budget 2022 in housing and Budget 2021 for infrastructure. Those investments have made a difference. We're looking at over about 7,000 projects completed, 8,000 new units. This is having a significant impact in First Nations communities. And what we're facing right now is a funding cliff where this funding is about to expire. We're moving from about 700 and something million in targeted funding to almost no targeted funding within the next couple of years for housing, leaving us with about $166 million a year in core funding that could be used for First Nations. That's less than $250,000 per First Nation.
Thank you, Mr. Gladstone. I'm going to have to end this round there. And I will continue now with Mr. Litau. No, Mr. Fragiscatos? Okay, gotcha. Okay, thank you. Sorry, apologies. Go ahead.
No problem. Chief Woodhouse and Mr. Gladstone and Mr. Larratt, thank you very much for being here today. Can you speak to me, Chief, more about housing? You made a comment at the tail end of your testimony about how you see some promise there, but you'd like to see some more things.
Who wants to go on housing? So I'll refer to Josh right away, but I do want to say we did have a verbal commitment from the minister for a 10%. They're saying target. I think we need to have an actual set aside with First Nations. We need to get to the start of that and to make sure that we're putting housing into First Nations, because right now we're being left behind. We're going to be left out of the Build Canada homes if it's not in writing and targeted specific for First Nations because of the way that the provinces and especially the provinces, they would never, ever help First Nations when it comes to housing or roads or anything else. So we need to make sure that we're targeting specifically as we work towards reconciliation in our relationship as a government and as a whole, government to government. So, Josh?
Thank you. I guess I would start by saying that we've done our work to understand what the housing and infrastructure gap is for First Nations. The infrastructure gap, including housing, is now over $400 billion. The housing gap itself, we're looking at over $135 billion, and that includes capital, operations, and maintenance. So we need a whole of government approach to address the housing crisis in First Nations, in addition to the enabling infrastructure that would help to establish the changes that we need to see in housing. The Build Canada Homes work that is being done right now, we know that Build Canada Homes should be part of the solution to addressing the housing crisis in First Nations. And we are hoping to see changes to the legislation that has been tabled to ensure a few things. First, that there are distinctions-based funding and supports included in the legislation and objectives built in to ensure that Build Canada Homes addresses the First Nations housing gap. And second, that there are legislated, mandated spaces for First Nations to participate at senior levels in governance, including on the board. So those are two very critical things that we see for housing on the Build Canada Homes front. There are other pieces to this puzzle also. Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, their Section 35 program. We haven't seen an increase in funding there since the 90s. And that's a core piece of the Government of Canada's ecosystem for First Nations housing. We're seeing significant decreases in the number of units that are being delivered through that program over the last decade. And we're looking for commitments on that front as well. So there are a number of things that I think we're looking for right now on a distinction basis to address First Nations housing, and we're looking forward to seeing more from the government on that.
Thank you very much. And I wonder if you could just, whether it's Chief Woodhouse or you, Mr. Gladstone, could highlight again the achievements that have been made over the past few years as a result of investments under the previous government, as a way of showing that while enormous challenges obviously remain, there have been outcomes that have served communities. You cited some numbers there quickly. Feel free to get into more specific details if you wish.
Some of the successes. Some of the successes.
Housing, it's Josh, or in general. Yeah, you have them.
Thank you very much. Indigenous Services Canada has reported on this, and there is information in the 2024 Auditor General's report, which I would recommend anyone read if they're looking for sort of a clear understanding of the situation in First Nations for housing. The lack of an Indigenous housing strategy to close the First Nations housing gap is one of the core findings of the Auditor General's report. There have been successes, I think, in the distinctions-based funding realm. There are, if the reporting that we've seen from Indigenous Services Canada includes about 7,000 projects completed and ongoing for housing, about 8,000 new units completed and ongoing. This is since 2016. Renovations and upgrades, about 17,000, and lots serviced, we're looking at about 4,500. So this is significant, and I would also just point to some of the statistics coming out of the department around core housing need. The data seems to show that the percent of on-reserve households in overcrowded housing is staying about the same from 2016 to 2021. Similarly, the on-reserve housing considered adequate is also hovering at about the same rate between 2018-19 and 2023-24. So these are numbers that I think show that there is some impact, but not enough.
Thank you very much. In that vein, and I just have a few seconds left, I would take it that you are, based on comments that the organization has put forward, encouraged by the emphasis at the Canada Infrastructure Bank on further partnerships, more engagement in this realm of housing and infrastructure.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank
I was going to say yes or no, but that's fine.
Et on va continuer pour 6 minutes avec
Mr. Garon, 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, I'd like to express my sincere condolences on behalf of the Bloc Québécois for the tragic events of recent days. We've been very deeply affected. I'd like to know whether you are able to give us a figure for housing needs in First Nations in Quebec and in the rest of Canada. Is it possible?
Yes, I believe we have those numbers. For Canada, housing needs in our Closing the Infrastructure Gap report include $135 billion for housing, including capital operations and maintenance funding. That would deliver about 155,000 new homes and 85,000 repairs that are needed across the country. Quebec-specific data I can certainly find.
C'était possible de nous.
Would it be possible to give us an answer in writing? We would be very interested in those figures. Regarding the federal budget, the Bloc Québécois had submitted non-negotiable and some negotiable demands to the government, and there are a lot to do with housing. Grand Chief Lance Raymond has projects that would make it possible to build a large number of homes for the First Nations. What is so specific about that project? We know that with property structures and the Indian Act, that does complicate building in the reserve. So why is that project particularly important to the First Nations?
Merci, thank you. I spoke with Chief Lance Raymond last week. I believe you may be speaking about his Yananchia financing model that has been a really critical part of the broader question around financing First Nations housing on reserve. I know market housing is something that needs to be addressed and developed, especially for communities in Quebec, but across the country. And it is part of the AFN's approach to housing to support initiatives that ensure First Nations have access to capital. So Yananchia and other initiatives that allow First Nations to access either private capital or loan guarantees that would enable them to do that is a critical part of the mix. And we're looking to expand those opportunities in order to ensure that First Nations have all of the tools at their disposal to address their housing needs.
Et on a invité le gouvernement à financer.
We invited the government to finance the project. We will do it again. It's very important to us, as it is for you. In C15, we can see the government focuses on reducing paperwork. We are hearing a lot about that. So how is that looking for the First Nations, Jordan's Principle, and so on? Do you think the effort is as broad as it needs to be, or as broad as it is in other sectors covered by C15?
Yeah, thank you for your question. The Red Tape Reduction Act is something that the Assembly of First Nations has flagged for a couple of reasons. Namely, one, it's likely that different ministers will apply different standards to the benefit risk analysis, leading to fragmented treatment of their considerable powers of exemption. There's a lack of oversight mechanism that exists with the Red Tape Reduction Act. And we see a prioritization of small businesses while there are other glaring issues happening with Indigenous Services Canada that relate to red tape. For example, Jordan's principal right now has over 140,000 backlog requests, which is a result of Indigenous Services Canada red tape, and that should be addressed immediately. There are concerns, again, about small businesses, and First Nations are looking forward to seeing how we can contribute to benefiting reducing red tape in small businesses, but it is worth noting that there are children with special education needs and health needs right now that are suffering because of red tape in Indigenous Services Canada, and those issues should be focused on just as much as measures to promote small businesses.
Et si vous aviez des propositions de changement?
If you had were to propose amendments to C15 to improve services to First Nations so that they are on an even playing field in red tape-related matters, what would those recommendations look like?
We can certainly follow up with a few more recommendations within our technical submission that is coming up here. Again, we recognize that the Red Tape Reduction Act and the associated measures with it are looking more towards small businesses. However, I think when you take a look at Indigenous Services Canada as a whole and the increase of reporting requirements, increased programs, less control going to First Nations, we can come up with a number of recommendations and submit that to the committee that takes it from a little bit more of a social perspective as well to address some of those concerns that are affecting our children and the health of our First Nations communities across the country.
Merci.
Okay, merci, Monsieur Garon. On behalf of the committee, I would like to thank our witnesses for today. We will briefly suspend while we change over for the final panel of our meeting today. Thank you very much. resume the meeting for the final half hour of today's discussion on budget there we go, Bill C-15. It's been a long morning. I'm delighted to be able to welcome David Chartrand, the President of the National Government of the Red River Métis of the Manitoba Métis Federation. He is joined by Sarah Perrin, Policy Analyst. Mr. Chartrand, you have 5 minutes for opening remarks, please.
Thank you very much for that. I do apologize. First, I have a chest cold, so I had Sarah sit beside me. If my voice goes, I'll pass her the speech. But let me start first, before I begin, actually. I want to offer my heartfelt condolences to the families and loved ones from Tumbler Ridge, Kitigan, CB, and Mistissini, who have been facing unthinkable losses this week. We share in our sorrow. Thank you to the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance for inviting me to bring remarks on behalf of the Manitoba Métis Federation, the national government of the Red River Métis. My name is David Chartrand, and I've been elected 8 times since 1997 and served the Red River Métis citizens as their president. In that time, I have seen many federal budgets, each has represented the economic realities of their moment in time. The hard reality of this moment has dictated the government's budget of 2026. The international order has moved away from cooperation amongst our traditional allies. Make no mistake, the need to respond and build certainty for our domestic security is essential. As with legislation on major projects, my government is prepared to support our federal partners in this budget, but I cannot forget about the social realities of my people. I am pleased to see that the balance of the urban, rural, and northern housing program will be dispersed. However, the wait times on these allocations are long. We have completed our part of the work. We are shovel-ready on multiple housing projects, and we are ready to build, and we are waiting for Canada. MMF has already proven a success in housing. More than 1,469 Red River Métis families now own their own homes through the first-time home buyer program. As a result, our citizens have infused $362 million in the economy. This is an extraordinary result over the past 5 years. In total, MMF manages 49 residential properties with a total of 152 units of affordable housing, including transitional housing units. This is MMF in action, helping our citizens confront the cost of living crisis today so they will have an asset to carry them into the future. The chair of this committee knows only too well MMF's investments in our community, investments we have made in early learning and childhood education infrastructure, has provided opportunities for parents to find their place in the economy, knowing their children have safe spaces to thrive. This is on top of job creation those investments create. It has also allowed us to contribute to the experience of the Ukrainian newcomer community in Manitoba, who understand only too well what a change in the international order has done. MMF created the Ukrainian evacuee childcare cohort to provide ELCC education opportunities for 25 Ukrainian citizens. The newcomers started their training in the fall of 2023, and by June 2025 were graduating from the program. All are now employed by my government. The success of this program has meant a cohort of 30 Ukrainian students began their studies in April of 2025. It is part of MMF's ELCC's drive to grow the child care workforce and fill those necessary roles. The success of our housing and early learning child care programs has been based on long-term agreements with Canada, which has allowed my government to make decisions based on long-term vision and planning. The nation-to-nation, government-to-government relationship is a proven model of success that supports this and must be honored regardless who forms government. However, the future of uncertainty of programs like urban programming for Indigenous peoples carries risk for our youth and takes away our, I apologize, I got a cold, and takes away our ability to make the same long-term strategic decisions. Additionally, we have 2,600 of our children in university, which we provide $5,000 per year towards the costs on support. But each of the year of the cost of this education will add up to $20,000, $30,000 annually per student. This equates to about $78 million for the 2,600 students they will have to pay. Let me remind you that statistics will show that the Métis students grew up in low-income households. Our people's forced history of going without means this is unattainable for our youth, or it will result in a heavy debt burden for them. We are still coping with the trauma of the 60s coup, with thousands of our children were taken away. This destroyed families and communities. Our young people are still growing up with the impacts of generational poverty, and breaking the cycle is heavily dependent of their success to education. This cycle has resulted in our people being less visible in positions of influence in government, in business, and other careers. We have made every effort to take ourselves through these cycles, but we need the tools to get our children where they need to go. We support space in the budget for major projects, in particular the view that funding be tied to results. But the investments must lead to opportunities in education, to build a skilled workforce, and our youth must have access to programming to provide them with the best start in life. We have a responsibility to our young people. The time for investment is now, I mean now, so they have skills to participate in nation-building projects. Following the federal promise to enact Métis-specific health legislation, we remain stuck in the same pattern of being caught in jurisdictional disputes between the provincial and federal governments. Too many of our people have died waiting to be provided with the same services as any other Canadian taxpayer. Do not forget, we are still waiting for Canada to follow through with our treaty, which I understand was first read this morning, and for Canada to settle our land claim in Section 31 of the Manitoba Act 1870. Concluding, these will ensure we're the national, international tables, and let me repeat on this particular statement loud and clear. Concluding this will ensure we are at the national and international tables. Whoa, sorry guys. My nose is running. I'm trying to stop it from coming down as I'm speaking. Concluding these will ensure we are at the national and international tables and not on anybody's menu. Your partners in the Confederation has been waiting for 156 years for this day. I'm not here to ask for handouts or hand up. If you want to put something in our hands, give us a shovel. Because Red River Métis are ready to do our part to continue to build this country. We ask for Canada to match our sense of urgency in this critical moment. I welcome your questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, President Chartrand. We will begin with 6 minutes from Mr. Schmale.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Maybe I can give the witness a second just to...
Yeah, sorry about that, James.
That's all right. Yeah. Can you need a second here?
No, my nose is running. So. I'm not contagious, by the way. I'm taking antibiotics. Okay.
Okay, we're good?
Yeah, we're good.
I think your common sense might be.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, President Chartrand, for joining us today, and congratulations. I hear your Ways and Means motion passed this morning in Parliament, so the first step, I guess, to your treaty. I do want to talk a bit about that, but you did mention I believe the wording was the Métis-specific health program. How do you see that working? How do you see it working with methods already in place?
Okay. Firstly, on that particular segment, as throughout our existence as a people in Western Canada, when it came to health issues, or any program in particular, but health has been a serious one for us in the last while, governments have been debating who's responsible to provide services, both provincial and federal. Keep on back and forth. No, it's your responsibility. No, it's yours. I say both governments still take our taxes without hesitation, but both of them are arguing who's going to serve us. And so we did a study which showed that we're in a worse health care than anybody else. We surpassed First Nation chronic illnesses already. And we have more people dying younger than everybody else. And yet, it's nobody seems to bring a solution forward. The previous government did make a commitment that there'd be a Métis-specific legislation for health for the Métis, because we don't have one. Right now, there's one for First Nation, there's one for Inuit, except us. Again, it's an anomaly. Always the Métis left out. So a promise was made. We did have some discussions. I brought in some resolutions of, I believe, what would save the taxpayer, save the cost, establish the system. I'll give you an example. We create our own solutions because we have no choice, and we're far beyond what we need. I knew that given the highest chronic illnesses we have, well, obviously that tells we're using the most prescriptions. So we started building pharmacies on our own. We have now 3 pharmacies, and with that revenue, I take the profits and I give my citizens 55 and older free medicine. So it's saving lives as we speak. Many have shed tears because of that. They couldn't afford their medicine. Some took treaty because they couldn't afford their medicine. Because they need some medicine, particular medicine, to survive. So right now, I see that Canada's got to come to terms with setting the segue of how that program can be established. I've given offers where I believe They're cost efficient, measurable, and it would make common sense for the good. Because one thing Canada or the province cannot deny us, I'm still going to use hospitals. You can't stop me there. But the problem is that's where the high costs are. So if we start early enough, then we don't have these high costs that we're facing in this country. So I was in the hospital the other day to visit my nephew. He's in one of my cabinet ministers. And I walked into the St. Boniface Hospital. They had to be, it's at 9 o'clock at night. As soon as I landed from Ottawa, I went straight to the hospital. And they had to be 75 in there, Jamie, sitting there, waiting for a doctor. And the hallways were blowing with beds everywhere. And so I couldn't believe what I was seeing with my own eyes. So clearly, there's a massive shortfall that's happening in the more needed basis. So from our perspective, we're not just saying, give us health care same as the First Nation. Give us same as the Inuit. We're saying, no, we'll come with a very practical, oriented solution, which will not, because I'm a taxpayer like anybody else in this room, so is my people. We'll come with a very practical plan of how we start addressing the health crisis my people face.
I don't know if I'll get to the treaty questions yet.
Well, I'm going to see you on Tuesday.
Days,
you asked me on Tuesday.
Yeah, in a few days we'll chat more. So let's talk more about this. You mentioned that Métis peoples are dying at a younger age. Is that compared to Indigenous people in general or everybody?
Everybody, including Indigenous people.
Why is that?
Well, again, Jamie, the number one issue that we're finding is that, to make it more practical, more result measurable, is that what happens to our people based on their pensions. They're living on pension, and that's all they have. And so what you find is that they have options, because many of them are sick with all these chronic illnesses that have now hit them. You find what they have choices now, whether they pay the hydro bill, buy their food, to survive, and pay the rent. Because an ambulance bill will take $200 to $400 off them. If they go twice, they're starving. They either choose to buy food or they pay ambulance bill. The next time the ambulance don't want to go there because you have a debt owing. So it becomes a very scary position for them. So we find that one of the studies showed the number one issue is they couldn't afford their medicine. Number one issue why they're dying young faster than everybody else. And again, is because we're on our own. There's no program for us to deal with the issue. And the economies of scale that we're in today were forced historically back to us. When, for example, when they chased us off our land, we own Winnipeg, Port de Perry, Nipoa. That was our land. And we can't take it back now. It's owned by farmers, owned by government, it's owned by individuals. So, but what happens, our economy really hit us back. And that's what really we're fighting to try to get back into the economy to try and take care of ourselves. But we need that tool. We need some of our taxes back. Let's put it that way, to be frank.
Okay, how much time do I have here? 1 minute. Okay, so cost of living obviously is impacting, as you just said, many of your members. So you mentioned groceries. People are choosing between, heating their homes, eating, or getting health care services in general. So you've probably seen the many reports that have come out. The food bank usage is at 2 million people a month. This has been a steady rise to get to this point. Does the economic challenges that we seem to be facing here in Canada as whole, that's hurting your members too, I'm sure. I'm sure the inflation crisis that we're having impacts your members.
A very brief response, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Clearly, I think, Jamie, the best way to answer that is this. When you look at the segment of 1,469 people buying their houses in the last 5 years, shows me that I know that's 1,469 people working. Otherwise, they would never get a mortgage. But clearly, our traditional economy has been...
Sorry, President Charles-Tron, we're going to have to move on to the...
I'll answer this question when next somebody asks me a question. Okay.
Good.
But
okay.
I'll share it, because it's a very important question you asked, and I want to make sure I share it.
So, Monsieur Letao, you have 6 minutes, please.
Well, justice person to another. I understand. I understand how you feel. And actually, if you could continue on what you were explaining, because I think it is important. Yes.
It's very important, because we seem to be doing not too bad in the urban environments. Our people are finding jobs, whatever kind of job they can get their hands on, they're getting them. Our people have very entrepreneurial backgrounds. And so, but what we're seeing in our traditional economy has been completely quashed. We used to be big in the forest industry, big in commercial fishing, big in trapping, big in tourism. All of that's gone. The last edge of the fishing is still surviving right now. And if you see the East Coast about how important fishing is to their existence, the same happens to us. So those in rural Manitoba, where I used to have maybe 30% unemployed in our villages, it's the opposite way. I have 70% unemployed. And it's causing me grave concern as a president in the future. What does that mean? Like, what's going to happen? And these people become caught up in the social welfare system. They may never leave and just give up. And they can't give up. The young people cannot give up on hope. And in order to do that, you've got to give them something in return. All this thing was taken from us. Nothing was ever come back to replace it. Nothing. No government has had a Métis economic plan in this country, a Métis-specific plan. So from our perspective, we're saying we have the answers. We just need you to look at the investment, because we're going to pay taxes back anyway. So you're going to get back your money from us, and we're going to help you with your challenge you face on filling these gaps of unemployed businesses that exist that need people to fill them. We don't have to shop overseas. You come shop in my communities, but give me the tools to get them ready.
Well, absolutely. And as you pointed out at the start of in your introductory remarks, there are going to be major projects going on in Canada, in Manitoba as well. Would you agree that, leading question, but that a portion of the jobs that will be generated by those major projects should be assigned to those local communities, so that they can provide first the employment opportunities, but at the same time, the companies that will develop those things need labor. So some sort of an arrangement with communities to make sure that they employ local people.
Yeah, there's been examples of that with the government at this point in time, and I hope future governments will take that. It's nation to nation, government to government, because it's measurable. It's distinct services of investments, and then you can measure that success. But if you put all Indigenous people, there's no way to proper measure it. But if you do distinctly First Nation, Métis, and Inuit, then you can measure it. But let me say this about capital projects. They're a ways from now. They're not going to happen tomorrow morning. So we have that now. How long is that going to take before the project first kicks in? And the preparation to get there. I'll give you an example, a change in this country that nobody's talked about yet. In Manitoba, our premier, being First Nation premier in Canada, first time, created a new model of relationship on hydro, one of the biggest companies we have in our province. And we are now in charge of building wind power. How they design it is complete reversal of the whole way. Now, Indigenous governments are the only ones that can bid for this 600 megawatt, and we are allowed up to 200 megawatts, which I'm bidding for right now, but we must be 51% owners. And so we've met with 14 international and national companies, and we've chosen our partner already, but we will be owners of this hydropower. And so it shows you a completely different transition. Enbridge, for example, which I have a very good relationship with Enbridge, they couldn't participate because their stakeholders do not let them go outside not being the full majority owner. So that's an example how industry is caught off guard on this one. But it's the first kind in Canada, and I hope there's more of them. So when national projects still come, I don't want us to be just the ones with the shovels and the brooms. I want us to be up in management. We want to be up in a different perspective. We want to be owning our construction companies. We have over 900 businesses in Manitoba registered right now. The procurement program, I've said to every government here, including Jamie, the issue about procurement is very clear. It costs Canada nothing when you do these national projects or big projects. You have a 5% procurement program, which I've been fighting for over 20 years. We finally see it working. And I swear it has changed lives, changed businesses, increased their strength in businesses. And all they have to do is the companies that win these bids have to guarantee us 5%. Like Skyline won them $11.2 billion agreement. So they have to give us 5% of a certain segment of it, because not the capital purchases. But at the end of the day, there's going to be jobs, there's going to be opportunities, there's going to be management, all kind of different fields that we'll get in. That 5% procurement changed them economic venture overnight and cost Canada not a penny.
And thank you for mentioning that, because one of the models I have in mind is the Cree Nation in northern Quebec, and the agreement they reached the La Paix des Braves 50 years ago, which gives them their own dedicated source of revenue. And with that you can achieve major progress. So a model like that, I would certainly be one that would support such a model. And I see that I'm about almost my time is up. But before I do that, access to capital. There's that model, but are there other ways through which the federal government could assist in providing guarantees, providing some ways to make sure that your businesses have access to capital?
A very, very brief response, please.
Very brief. I know I talk long, but I try to explain myself while I'm talking. But the investment of hydro, that 200 megawatts that we're bidding on, is going to cost $500 million to build those 38 towers. So that shows you what we need, some capital loans or some. It's longevity of how do you get them? Is it hard to get it? It's easy to get it. This is a guaranteed initiative, guaranteed. But am I going to have a hard time getting the loan?
I'm sorry, President Chartrand, I'm going to have to.
I'm not. Okay,
I know, but we have a limited amount of time. I'm
Jamie,
sorry.
they don't even let me speak.
I know. Well, we'll see. Maybe Monsieur Garon will be generous. On va continuer pour 6 minutes avec Monsieur Garon.
Mr. Garon, you have 6 minutes. I want to reassure my witnesses that I also feel time is short. You recently signed an autonomy treaty with the Government of Canada after negotiations that began in 2018 and concluded in November 2024. Just need the enabling legislation to be passed and to be in force. This is the first time in Canadian history that a modern treaty has been signed with the Métis Nation. Why did it take, in your view, so long for Ottawa to recognize the Métis right to self-determination? And what were the political and legal impediments to such recognition?
I apologize, I don't speak French. I speak Saulteaux in my second language, my first language, actually. But let me say this. The treaty is something that means everything to us. It's more symbolic than anything else. A treaty was promised to Riel and our people back already in 1870. We bought Manitoba into Confederation as the Métis government of the prairies, and mostly actually Western Canada followed behind. But the sad part about it, when the treaty was promised to be given to us by our first prime minister, instead of negotiators coming to the table, they sent military, and that was not. Our guns were already put down. We have always been a military people. We defended Canada in many aspects, but for some reason after that, this country, throughout the educational systems and everything, talked about us as being villains and bad people, and people that would not be actually recognized. If you remember the famous quote of John A. Macdonald, "Do ever dog bark in Quebec, he shall hang." So the symbolism, what our government, for whatever reason, began not to want to recognize us. And to this day, you heard me say, even in health today and education, all these segments I have, governments are still fighting who's responsible. Yet I say, would government take our taxes without hesitation? So the sad part about that is that it seems to linger yet, and how do we change the minds of others? And I always say this, and I'll close off with these comments on this. I said, I hope there'll be a day. I've been a president for 28 years now, and I come from the Department of Justice, my background. But when I look at it and I look towards the future, will there be a day I walk into an assembly speaking at a university in this country where I don't have to explain who I am and tell people who I am and tell the history of who I am so they could recognize I am too in the Constitution or Section 35? Will there ever be that day? I hope I'm still alive when one other leader will be speaking and they'll know who the Red River Métis are instantly, as you would know who First Nation are, as you know who the Inuit are. Why is it you do not know me? So that's been our challenge, sir. It's that governments have been denied that we exist with special rights and privileges that we earned, we paid our lives for, and that Section 35 is supposed to mean something to us, but today it's not really meant anything to us to a point where it should be, as in every other Indigenous people in this country.
C'est très touchant ce que vous nous dites là. C'est d'autant.
What you're saying is very touching, and it's all the more sad because John A. Macdonald's statements have been used again by someone who's the Canadian ambassador to Washington. This shows how badly we've learned the lessons of history and haven't learned that some things should never have been repeated. You talked about treaty implementation. Does the budget contain provisions that will facilitate its implementation? Is there money set aside for it? How will the treaty be put in place? Is it symbolic, or will there be practical aspects that will be facilitated by C-15.
In fact, it's a question that Jamie also asked of me. But the position is symbolic more than anything. There's not a question you have to fear in Parliament when you vote on it that's going to cost everybody a ton of money, including my taxpayers, the Red River Métis. The symbolism is everything to us. It's something that means, that our dream is going to come reality. Riel's dream is going to come reality. It's not about money. It's about governing ourselves, our way, through our rules, our laws, our processes. So I don't think government will be putting any money away, but hopefully Section 35 should tell them they should be putting money away without question. It should be there. I shouldn't have to fight my way in every time. And I'll tell you this, and everybody here, there's not a day, and I've been a leader for 28 years, there's not a day I have not fought for the resources of our fund. Nobody has ever come to us and offered it and say, here, you're Section 35, you're the Métis, we have a responsibility to work with you, here's investment for you. Start working. There's never been that day yet.
Merci.
Thank you. We have 50 seconds left, and I'd like to leave you that time to see if you have anything to add that might be useful in our study of C-15.
Well, I think what's going to be useful, Bill 15 is going to be dealing with particular, there'll be concerns from our side, trust me, because Bill 15 is going to give the powers to ministers to make decisions to circumvent the red tape, let's put it that way. And from our perspective, will it also leave the ability to be left out, that they'll just say, no, this is too much of a priority, we just have to leave you out at this point in time. That doesn't get you anywhere. I think it gets you further behind the 8 ball and gets you in trouble. Because we won't be, trust me, we'll never let nobody push us around. So from our perspective, I do support these projects. We have a big problem in this country. We should fear what's happening to us. We have a madman to the south. We have others not far from the Arctic that are looking at our territory. We're in a dangerous world right now, and we want to do our part. I want to support government blindly in some ways because I believe we need to work together. The sad part about it is, are you going to forget me again? As I just echoed over and over, we're always forgotten. If we're included, I don't think you'll see as many problems. If there's proper, at least dialogue and consultations, Bill 15 should work. But if ministers decide that they don't have to any discussion with us as Section 35 rights holders in this Constitution of Canada, then I think you're going to have some problems.
Thank you, President Chartrand. Merci, Monsieur Garon. On behalf of the committee, I would like to thank you for joining us today and sharing your testimony. And unless there are any objections, I'm going to adjourn the committee.